Okay, I got to tell you about Woke School. I think I already might have mentioned Woke School a little bit when we were recording a bonus episode.
Yeah, I think.
But
Mhm.
yeah. So it's the training for the harm reduction hub. And so like I'll get more into what the harm reduction hub is, I guess, in my most base thing I've done. Because there's a couple things I'm gonna get into, but like the training for it is just the like underground leftist training centers that like the Daily Mail imagines, literally beat for beat. The first slide of the entire thing of session one. I've had two of them now, actually. Session one, the first slide of the PowerPoint said, "We live in a society," and then it was Cena from Rats actually who came on the show. I was giving the first session, and they said, "All right, I got to tell you, got to give you this spiel now." And they were like, "Right, we live in a system called racial capitalism," and then they just like told us about that for like 10 minutes. Then they had now, okay, so as you can imagine, me being in like woke school, it literally is like a class. Like we're being asked about like, what's an example of a power dynamic between classes and society. And I obviously am just like, I know. And I'm just trying to like carefully balance between like, I want everyone to know I know. Obviously, I can't resist, but I don't want to like discourage anyone. So I'm like looking around to make sure no one else has the answer first. And then I'm like, Gramsci. But yeah, so it's really fun. It's really fun. And like I'm also meeting like really interesting people who it's been something that's really interesting is like when we've said this so many times about getting off of the online left and into like real spaces and organizing with people and meeting people and how different it is and all the things you learn just about like just meeting people in real life. But just like how striking it's been to be in woke school with people who just have had like a tough life and have like lived in like halfway houses or whatever. And like that was really so the second session was about drugs. Like literally the first session ends with next week we're doing drugs with Juan. And I was like, yes, I love Juan and I love drugs. And then like, we're learning about it and just like the teachers of the class don't know as much as some of the students because we did an exercise where we were like, and this is again how much it's like the leftist training centers that were just like we were rolling dice that had the names of different drugs on them and then administrating methods. And the point of the exercise was obviously to like talk about what kind of harm reduction advice we could give to someone who is planning to like use this drug in this way. And like they were rolling the dice and like sometimes it would come up with like smoking and then three different drugs on the other dice. And the teachers would be like, I'm actually not sure if you can do that. And like the same guy was being like, yeah, I've seen it. You can do that thing. You can smoke that. Yeah.
Amazing.
Anyway, yeah. So we're gonna have like a week on abolition and a week on sex work, and it's just I'm loving woke school. I just gotta share how excited I am to be in woke
Yeah.
school and to be getting top marks.
So glad you're finally getting what you deserve.
Indoctrinated at the woke school.
I'm getting a good grade in woke, everyone. I'm so happy. All right. Well, let's Red Planet. You already know a little bit of what I'm going to talk about in this next segment. Welcome in, everybody. We're going to start the show like we usually do by asking what's the most base thing you did this week, Mule.
Oh, well, thanks for asking. I think I was talking about this on the last show, how I was planning this anyway. I found out that the job that I got was a big global multinational company that basically turns out, surprisingly, that such a company would be one of the biggest investors in Elbit Systems, Israel's largest weapons manufacturer in the UK. Not only that, but they also insure Elbit Systems as well. It's a company called Allianz, and so I got super depressed over the holiday season about it. I was trying desperately to stay there and to, organize people, in my other colleagues. and it was very difficult because they, everyone works from home, so it was all over Teams chats and stuff like that, trying to speak to each other about like, oh, how do you feel about what's going on? Have you heard about the demonstrations? Because luckily, obviously, huge shout out to comrades of the show, Palestine Action, have been doing actions at Allianz, workplaces all over Europe, basically to show that actually, yeah, this is something that's happening. And so everybody at work knows that there are protests happening at our offices. They just don't know why, because obviously the internal communications are very like censored, like don't talk about it, hush hush. So essentially, like when I was having these conversations, it was okay and it was good. They were all saying, oh god, yeah, no, I did think it was going to be something to do with Palestine, and oh, that really sucks, like I can't believe it. Most people responded by saying, oh, I'm just going to get another job, which I completely understand, obviously, like because of what's coming up next. But basically, I found it very difficult to basically try and organize workers because of that reason. And because I was getting more and more depressed about it, I was on holiday for a bit over Christmas, over the holiday period, and I was just getting more and more depressed, thinking about the prospects of going back and like basically helping this company make money, even if it's not directly for the genocide. You just still feel complicit so much if you don't say anything, if you don't do anything. So my last final act, I think, because, well, I'll get into the details in a bit, was to basically send around a company-wide email to everybody, every Allianz UK employee, because, yeah, they just let you do that stuff. If you get on, like, a company's email, like, they don't stop. I don't know why they don't stop you. They made it, like, so obvious. Like, they send the company-wide emails, and it just has, like, in bold, like, in the to bar, just like, yeah, you just, like, copy and paste this and put it into your to box to send an email to everyone in the company in the country. So I sent a big thing, an explainer, just a mini explainer.
The first week at UCL, someone replied to an email that had the to all students and faculty, and all they'd written in the message was bellow, like hello with a B, and it just started this massive chain where people were just replying bellow over and over again, and everyone was getting emailed, and it was chaos.
That's so good. I love that shit. It's just like tech chaos, like so good. But yeah, no, so I did that. I sent a big an explainer, and I included a petition, because obviously the idea when you're trying to organize your workplace is you get everybody to sign a petition that you want a certain thing to change. You deliver it to the boss. If the boss doesn't comply or doesn't want to meet to negotiate, that's when you talk about strike action, basically. So that's kind of where I was going with it. But obviously I just sent the email round with the explainer and the petition, and I sent an email to my manager saying I am hereby withdrawing my labor from Allianz because of this reason. Like, I can't be complicit. I can't do this. Like, I implored him to do the same. I was like, if you do actually value this, and you should also join me in the strike. But also I understand if you don't want to do that for whatever reason. So if you don't want to do that, at least tell people about my petition. And all that's really happened since then is that the head of the department has gotten in touch with me. He's kind of like the head of the region, and the region being the UK, I think, because obviously it's a multinational corporation. So obviously they call different countries regions, basically. He got back to me and was like, is this you resigning? Basically, like that was what he asked me. And so I used that opportunity to basically send him a massive suck-ass email just being like, Michael, thank you so much for getting in touch with me. This is one of the best opportunities that we've got to save Allianz's reputation. People are already calling Allianz murderer insurers. This kind of thing doesn't go away. People still remember that Hugo Boss designed the uniforms for the SS officers in the Nazis. This is a great opportunity for us to work together and find out how to make this difference, and not only do that, but improve the lives of Palestinians. And then I just got a reply from like a HR person after that. So obviously he didn't take this once in a lifetime opportunity. Michael Kudom, you silly little winnet. What are you thinking? I hope you've done your research, because I unfortunately included DJ Mule in the name of my change.org petition. So I hope you're watching Red Planet right now and you can see that I'm calling you a silly Billy. You should reconsider and email me back. They have since, though, sent me $2,000. I don't think I've told you this, Sophie, but they sent me $2,000. Now, that's more than what my wages were, right? So normally my wages would be about £1,500.
Was it a month of wages and severance? Was that them giving you the boot?
Don't know. This is the thing. I've had no communication. So this sort of raises the question as to whether they've actually followed the legal employment law disciplinary process. If they haven't, I could take them to a tribunal with a union. So I'm thinking about doing that this week because, you know, if I'm not going to actually make a strike happen and have, you know, use that for, to leverage, make actual changes, then at the very least I could just like make it such a pain in the ass for them that they don't fucking forget. And then on top of all the other pressure that they have, you know, hopefully it'll add to the pile, as it were. So that is probably the most base thing that I've done since we were last live. Other than that, I went to a Palestinian prisoner solidarity event last night, and I wrote a little postcard to someone called Jordan, who is actually one of my friends. I used to do photos at a place that we both worked at. She was a coyote at Coyote Ugly. They do have bars named after the film in fucking Manchester. I think it's shut down now anyway, but whatever. But I used to take the pictures there, and she was just like, oh yeah, that's my fucking brother. She got onto me one day and was saying about it, and she read like a poem that her dad wrote, which was really, really like just amazing because like her family and her are from Northern Ireland, so obviously they understand the solidarity between Palestine and Northern Ireland. So it was just a really beautiful event. So that was really, really nice. And today I went on a little estate agent scout recon mission to see like how we can get in because we want to use their services. So that's what we did today. But yeah, what about our Tim? What's the most basic thing you did this week?
Like literally nothing. I just like worked and that was it.
Sick.
Just kept myself alive.
That's pretty basic.
Yeah, it is. But Soph, you obviously had the woke school, but what else do you have going on?
Yeah, I mean, I'll explain a bit more about woke school. It's been my New Year's resolution to finally get involved with a couple of orgs who I've thought for a while are cool, but I haven't been like going to actually pitch in and volunteer my time, whatever. And yeah, so one of them is the Harm Reduction Hub. It's run out of the offices of Release, which is a drug nonprofit. If you want to learn like just basically all about it, you can go watch our episode with Sino discussing rats, and it's really good. But the point of Harm Reduction Hub is to help over-policed people, so people with precarious immigration statuses, sex workers, drug users, homeless people, and the intersection of these, right? And just like provide a place where people can be helped in some way, and just like offer whatever kind of harm reduction advice is available, like is possible to offer. And yeah, I've had two weeks of training now. The training will be ongoing. I'll share any more like particularly enjoyable parts of woke school after that, and then I'll let you all know when I've like actually started volunteering at the hub. But yeah, I just think it's important to like, I think that like harm reduction is very in line with the basic philosophy of Red Planet. Like when we talked about transformative justice, right? We've talked about how our perspective on justice is like that the best we can often do when there is like interpersonal harm as opposed to systemic harm is to just try to improve the conditions for everyone to make sure that harm does not happen again in future, and just like understand why things happen. And like harm reduction applied in this way is almost like that, but instead of like one person like people being in conflict, it's like people are taking drugs or people are doing sex work and are likely to be harmed in these ways, right? And again, like the best you can do is not put someone in jail because they smoked a spliff one time. They didn't even inhale while you're doing. And the best you can do is like inform people about like the safest ways that they can be doing what they're doing. Yeah, you know, and just make sure people are having the best lives they can. That is one of them. That is the one org that I've been like starting to get involved with. And the other thing I did this week was get involved with London Renters Union, which is the other org that was in my New Year's resolution to like get involved and do some stuff. And yeah, like I say, like I'll let you know how it goes. That was the stuff I've done since last show, but we want to know what you've been doing. Yes, our lovely listeners, viewers, etc. So what base things you've been doing, you can message us or you can send an email to based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns if you're cool with that, and we may shout out in a later episode. I will also be mentioning based@redplanetshow.com email address in a story in the news in a minute, so just keep your ears peeled for that. Quickly remind everyone as well that our show is supported by our patrons over at patreon.com/red_planet, and it's their support that makes the show possible. We'll talk more about it later on, but for now, Tim, can you tell us about sex workers in Mexico?
Yes, this was just over a week ago, I think. So trans activists from a sex workers group in Mexico broke into court buildings in Mexico City to protest the possible release of a man named Alejandro N. So he's accused of stabbing trans activist Natalia Lane back in 2022. This is wild because it was the first ever case in Mexico City that they actually treated as what was an attempted trans femicide. So not just like a murder or attempted murder or stabbing or anything like that, but this was like an attack motivated by the trans identity of the victim. So and this was Natalia Lane is an activist but also a sex worker, and he stabbed her in a hotel, and they haven't released too much information, but I think it's pretty kind of, I think we can conclude from that, like what was going on. But so Judge Ruby Celia Castellanos Paradas decided to let Alejandro out of jail and put him under house arrest while the trial is ongoing. Natalia called out the judge during the protest saying, "If I die tomorrow, your hands will be stained with blood." So basically saying that this man is out there free. He could kill me, or he could kill another person, another trans woman out there, And so even though Natalia was like kind of, like the figurehead of this protest, and it is kind of around this guy in particular, it's kind of part of a wider movement about all trans women in Mexico, because just like the overwhelming level of violence against trans women in Mexico, especially sex workers. So they burst into the judicial building. They spray painted their slogans and demands all over the walls. They smashed the glass doors, windows, destroyed, like computers, everything, like whatever they could. There's, the video where they're just smashing stuff with hammers.
It's such a good video. It's always good to see a woman go apeshit on anything. And I believe more bigger, more better. So like seeing a big woman go apeshit on stuff and just smashing everything is great.
So it was it was trans sex workers, cis sex workers, their family, allies, all getting together in solidarity, just smashing the shit out of the actual judicial building, and all the things that are part of it that help it operate and all this kind of stuff. So really, really, a very brave and also incredibly, I guess, kind of I feel like this is like an effective thing when it's like, this isn't like, this judicial system isn't working for us, so we are directly going to attack it, like it's there's a lot to be said about going directly for, like they could directly target this Alejandro, and I'm sure, like obviously people probably will, but like the bigger picture here is this entire judicial system, because even part of the protest they were also joined by the mother of a trans woman who was murdered just last year, who was frustrated because even though they know who did it, who killed her daughter, they haven't been charged yet. And how, like she did a small speech talking about how it has just like destroyed their entire life and their family. because these cases, these trans femicide cases, specifically for sex workers, are just not treated. It's not a priority, and this is something that we see all across the world with the deaths of sex workers, particularly trans women, that they're considered not as important as like you see a well-to-do like kid from a like from a rich family in a nice side of town or whatever like that. You'll see their pictures in the newspaper on the side of milk cartons, all that kind of stuff like that. But it's like trans women disappear all the time in the inner city, and it's like you just don't hear about it.
It's not like in Mexico, but like there are like trans women go missing in London, and like there are like posts that pass around on like social media and like don't get headlines.
Yeah. And it happens everywhere. It happens even in Auckland, and it's like the kind of thing where it's like sometimes it doesn't even get and this is what makes sex workers, and especially trans sex workers, such like kind of, I guess, like easy targets for the real kind of like for all of these like violent men, is that a lot of the time they are separated from their family, or they're in especially like vulnerable positions, which makes them like a particularly easy target for someone who wants to kind of exploit that. And it's for the same reason that like like the police and stuff often don't take these cases seriously, because they like dehumanize especially kind of like street based, or like like high volume sex workers, as opposed to like the like kind of upper class escort sort of thing like that. Like a street based sex worker is considered a pretty it's like pretty low on the ladder of things they're going to investigate, which is like it's horrific. Massive support and solidarity to all of the women in the sex workers union in Mexico City. It's hopefully we see more of this. Like, I think even around the world, there's so many places in the world right now where this is a huge problem. Even, in the Imperial Court in Australia, violence against women is like, especially sex workers, is wild. Like every time I open up Instagram, I'm seeing stuff about like, because I have like a lot of friends that are doing sex work over there from when I used to live over there, and they're always posting about how it's, it's someone they knew, someone that was close to them is, has been murdered or disappeared or something like that. And it's like it's even though it is particularly bad in Mexico City, it's happening probably in your city as well, so so why don't you tell us about a little bit about what is happening in the States at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely, sure thing. And I think there's a strong relationship between what I'm going to talk about here and what you were just talking about, but I'll get to that in a second. So trans people are rushing to change their documents and organize mutual aid structures as Trump declares the US will only recognize gender assigned at birth. This week, of course, saw the inauguration of President Donald Trump, just rapist, racist, fascist scumbag, who has declared his re-election the revolution of common sense, which I think like a lot of his inauguration stuff was just really giving like, this is for old people. Like old people are just like they're very reactionary voter base, and they're confused by the modern world, and we're just going to try and like squish the modern world into a shape that old people can comprehend. And so like we're gonna make big gestures to say that we're like dealing with the immigrants, so that you don't have to worry that you'd like your worker in your retirement home is stealing it from your purse or whatever. And we're gonna say that there's only two genders. And it was all pretty embarrassing, but also pretty scary for a lot of people. So Elena Dimopoulos, writing for The Guardian, says, right after Donald Trump won the election, Max Kuzma set to work. As a trans man living just outside of Cleveland, Ohio, he knew he needed to get his documentation in order. He considers himself lucky that he already legally changed his name, but rushed to make sure his passport and other documents reflected that. Like so many other trans Americans, Kuzma worried Trump would make good on his promise to roll back LGBTQ plus rights and threaten trans healthcare and the overall safety of the queer community. Quote, I was anticipating an attack, Kuzma said. Still, watching Trump sign an executive order that rolled back trans and non-binary people's rights felt like, quote, a twist of the knife. During his inaugural process, Trump said, quote, as of today, it will henceforth be official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. Quote, as I kept reading each additional point in that executive order, I started feeling more and more sick to my stomach, Kuzma said. Now, from a different article, Andrea Gonzalez Ramirez, reporting for The Cut, interviewed Thomas Meerkamper, managing attorney at the Transgender Law Center. Asked to explain the executive order, Meerkamper said, it directs all of the federal agencies in the executive branch to adopt new policies that pretend as if transgender people don't exist. That encourages bullying and harassment of trans people. But most importantly, this order does not change anybody's rights, and it does not change the law. The order begins the process of changing federal regulations and policies. People are really scared of what all this means, and what they need to know is that, unfortunately, we're just going to have to wait and see. And yeah, like this is, I mentioned a little bit in the video that I released. I probably should have mentioned that in my based things, actually. I released a video about Trump. It's called What Now? And it's about how we on the left, how revolutionaries and organizers and activists and leftists prepare for what's coming with Trump. And also understand like the collapse of the imperialist project that this clearly is. And something I said is that like Trump has built spectacular fascism. He hasn't built like fully supported by the majority of the working class like fascist apparatus in the way that like Mussolini or Hitler did or other examples throughout history. He's got this like very like this fascism that exists in the world of the spectacle. And so you see lots of changes like this, where he's like, well, look, we've seized the levers of power and we're going to push through this change. There's only two genders, male and female, and it's the one that you're assigned at birth. And then like everyone underneath has to, the whole way down in the government have to actually figure out what the fuck that means in terms of legal processes and documentation and everything. And like on the lowest level, right, we know that like fascists will be emboldened and that things will be really fucking hard for trans people, but it doesn't directly translate into like what Trump might imagine, that it completely just like signs a piece of paper and it erases trans people, obviously. The way this relates to the story Tim was talking about, I just want to mention is just that like it will result in trans people having such a more shit time in America in a bunch of different ways, right? It will stop trans women being sent to women's prisons in all cases, which means that trans women who are in prisons are going to be raped, just at horrifying rates. It's going to be awful. It's going to stop. It's going to probably stop trans people having any legal recourse if their employers discriminate against them and just like fire them for being trans or just treat them like shit for being trans. And then what other choice do they have? And the way this relates into the story we were just talking about, like, is this will produce a lot more trans sex workers probably, because it's going to produce a lot of trans people who are super vulnerable. And when trans women, but also all trans people like are super vulnerable, a lot of them do turn to sex work and wind up in more vulnerable positions and do the kind of jobs that they can do. When I've been really vulnerable, I have done sex work. It's a thing that happens. And this means that these people are then way more vulnerable to extreme violence. To carry on with my own example, like I was assaulted by a client. Like this, it's just a straightforward line. Like when people are made more vulnerable, they are in a more vulnerable position. That means more harm can happen to them. So back to the story. The order sets out that there are only two sexes or genders. As an aside here, right, there's an exhausting discourse about sex and gender that's been going around with people who are trying to waste everyone's time. But as feminist Amir Srinivasan points out, sex determines so much about people's life under patriarchy that sex is just gender, like except for any like differences that a doctor might need to deal with, like sex and gender just are the same thing, which is why when trans people transition, they change sex, and it's just not complicated. So the order sets out there are only two sexes or genders, and the sex is determined at conception. So this is another brief aside, right? Like a lot of people were sharing around that the order says you're female if you were female at conception, and everyone is actually female originally. Like anyone who is assigned male at birth, like anyone who is male or in whatever way, like has become male. Like people are phenotypically female at first as they develop in the womb, right? Which like people share this around, and then loads of other people were saying like, there's no point in saying this because it's like it's not an own to say that technically this is true, and it's like, yeah, it's not an own. It doesn't change anything materially, but I think we can walk and chew gum. And I actually got tired of the backlash, and I was just like, it's okay for us to just say it's funny that they know this little about everything that their law literally says. They've written a law that says everyone in the world is a woman. Anyway. So what is materially more relevant is that this legal change is possible based on the nonsense legal framework of fetal personhood, which has also been brought into American law with Trump's changes to restrict the bodily autonomy of people capable of getting pregnant. Pregnancy Justice, a US org that defends the rights of pregnant people, elaborated on what fetal personhood is. Fetal personhood is a radical legal doctrine that seeks, this is from Pregnancy Justice. Fetal personhood is a radical legal doctrine that seeks to endow fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses with full rights and legal protections. Fetal personhood directly challenges the rights of women and anyone capable of pregnancy and creates a direct conflict between pregnant people's rights and those of so-called unborn children. By elevating embryonic and fetal rights over the rights of women and pregnant people, anti-abortion proponents use legal and policy frameworks informed by fetal personhood principles to impose government surveillance over women's bodies for the purpose of social and political control. Just like that's where this comes from. That's why they're saying like this stuff at conception, it should immediately ring an alarm bell for anyone like that. If we're talking about life at conception, it's actually an anti-abortion thing. So and I think it's also like a really clear demonstration of how, as we've been saying for absolutely forever, like bodily autonomy is just one thing, and like this ties back to the enforcement of patriarchy by the violent like anti woman genocide of the enclosures and the witch burnings and all of this. Like patriarchy was violently enforced in Europe before it was exported into America, and like states have always, when they feel threatened, like clamped down on like rigid patriarchal, like states tend to be patriarchal, that's how it goes, clamped down on rigid patriarchal gender roles. And so like these attacks on bodily autonomy, of course they're one thing, because that's just the state doing this same thing. It's scared and so wants to force everyone to be something that human beings are not. Right. So this is interesting. A post has circulated around a bit, and I want to share a bit from it. But like haven't fully verified any of this. This is from Reddit, unfortunately. So I just want to caveat before I say this. But someone claiming to be a passport adjudicator posted to Reddit since the changes came in, saying the offices that handle passport changes have been in, quote, chaos, with up to hourly changes in direction given to employees. They're just completely unsure of what's actually going on. The poster said that it was no longer, quote, technically possible for them to issue passports with an X gender marker, and advised trans people reading, quote, if you are a trans first-time applicant and have been able to get an amended birth certificate in your state, we'll have no way of knowing the amended birth certificate doesn't match your assigned sex at birth. So if you have your documents in your current name and gender identity, I would apply as soon as possible. In the UK, we have this very stupid system called a gender recognition certificate, which is like additional bureaucracy that amends onto the birth certificate that says that you have changed your sex. And so like there is a way for the government to always tell that you are trans, which is a good reason not to get a gender recognition certificate unless you're a idiot liberal. But in the US, a lot of places you can just change your birth certificate and then there's no record of it, and then you can make this kind of change. So this is sound advice, and anyone who has changed their birth certificate, if you know any trans people who have changed their birth certificate, who have not changed their passport, this is something they'll still be able to do right now. Besides the rush to change documents, trans people have also been doing community level organizing to bolster community capacity for self-defense and mutual aid. I can't really talk more about what I know about what's going on with this for fairly obvious reasons, but I do know that some things in line with what I talked about in my video for how people should be organizing are already happening. Some things that people are finding space to be able to disappear and not be surveilled. Some people are organizing some stuff that will relate to our topic of discussion today, like alternative tech solutions for organizing. And as well as that, people are organizing mutual aid stuff, self-defense stuff. I hopefully will sort out some anonymized interviews for a future episode. And I just wanted to say, if you're a trans American and you'd like to tell us anonymously about the steps you're taking to keep yourself and your community safe, you can contact us at based@redplanetshow.com with the words trans community organizing in the subject line, and we can include it into the reporting that we're going to do on that stuff in a later episode. That's Trump and trans people. Mule, why don't you tell us about the next? We've split up Trump so that no one of us has to just do
it's just so
all
much
Trump. It's so much Trump this week, unfortunately. It won't be like this every week.
The next couple of stories are also Trump.
Tell us about Trump and Palestine, please.
I'm gonna. Thank you so much. I will. So, yes, obviously, Trump being so bad on trans rights should also give you a good idea on how bad he's being with Palestine. Trump has spoken with the King of Jordan, Abdullah bin al-Hussein, to discuss if he would consider accepting Palestinians into Jordan as a clear attempt to aid Israel in ethnically cleansing Palestine. Jordan's foreign minister, Ayman Safadi, has said in no uncertain terms that Jordan is unwavering in its rejection of displacing Palestinians. He's also, Trump, that is, also scheduled to have a call with the president of Egypt, El-Sisi, to discuss the same thing. Luckily, El-Sisi also has a consistent track record of denying the USA and Israel's request to take the entire population of Gaza into the Sinai Peninsula. The important thing for us to take from this news is that this appears to be completely in line with the imperial cause media using Trump to highlight acts that, whilst heinous, are all things that have been done many times over by the Israel and US historically. The Democrats have also entertained ideas about the forced displacement of Palestinians, with only in May last year Joe Biden considering a motion to accept Palestinian refugees with US relatives into the country as permanent residents. According to the BBC, in response to Trump's call with the King of Jordan, Abu Yahya Rashid, a man displaced in the southern city of Khan Yunis, said, "We are the ones who decide our fate and what we want. This land is ours and the property of our ancestors throughout history. We will not leave it except as corpses." It is a good moment. We thought in the show today to talk about the fact that there has been a ceasefire in place in Gaza since the 19th of January. So far, 7 Israeli hostages have been released in exchange for 290 Palestinian hostages. The resistance in Palestine has proven single-handedly that even against the military weight of the entire empire, righteous resistance will always win. Israel categorically achieved 0 of their stated aims in setting out against Gaza after October the 7th, 2023, and still hadn't managed to clear the Gaza Strip of Palestinians despite record-breaking bombardment of the open-air prison, which is pretty embarrassing considering that is their entire aim anyway. So I think the thing to remember is that this is the ceasefire is possibly. I had written previously that this will likely be the reason, but I have since decided that it's a bit dogmatic to just say that this is definitely what's happening when it's a bit speculation at this point. I speculate that this the main reason for the ceasefire happening now is basically because Trump wanted his inauguration to not be mired with news of stuff going on in Palestine, and also I would arguably say that Trump is at this point looking for anything to have a legacy about, and if he can achieve ethnic cleansing in Palestine without further bombardment, without further bloodshed, he's going to try and do that. And it kind of makes sense to me that is the case. But obviously the thing to remember, again, another thing to remember is that the ceasefire is, it's a limited time ceasefire. It's going to be for 60 days, or I think it was 60 days. And also the horrific stuff that is continuing to happen in the West Bank has been exacerbated. Israeli settlers have scaled up attacks on the West Bank since the ceasefire in Gaza with the IOF. And the last news report that I saw about this, I think, was 5 days ago. And 10 Palestinians in the West Bank had been killed as a result of that. I imagine it's a lot higher now. And this is as a result of Trump signing an executive order, which basically, it's hard to say whether it is because of the signing of this executive order, but essentially Joe Biden, I think Joe Biden actually used an executive order, which is a weird sentence I never thought I'd say, to actually say that Israeli settlers who were committing pogroms in the West Bank wouldn't be allowed to come to America, which is just like a nothing order, because it's like, well, they're settlers, they're going to want to stay in Israel. Why would they ever want to come back to the US? Unless they're going to try and escape war crimes. I don't know. It's just like it's such a bizarre order for him to have done anyway. But obviously that's why he probably did it, because he knew it meant nothing. But Trump has reversed that. So possibly it could be that that has given Israeli settlers, this sort of signal that actually, you should just commit more war crimes and more genocidal acts against Palestinians in the West Bank. It's obviously extremely bad. And horrific, and all solidarity and all love to everyone in Gaza, everyone in Palestine, occupied Palestine. Ceasefire is one thing, but liberation is the only thing that should make us stop our efforts at this point. So, more racist shit from Trump. Tim, why don't you tell us about what he's doing with immigration?
Yeah. So, we're all, what we've already started talking about it, but in his first 24 hours, Trump was just smashing out executive orders, which I think is I think it's basically like last time he got in, and you remember when he first got in last time and they were all kind of like fucking around and he was just like burning through people in his team, swapping people in and out, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
This time they understand the mechanisms. So they're, he's got his team in there and they're just smashing it out, So, he signed a bunch of orders that shut down asylum pathways at the US-Mexican border, which includes suspending entry for undocumented immigrants and ending the use of the CBP1 app, which is an app that they could use when you're coming up to the border to it has a bunch of stuff like checking waiting times and all that kind of stuff, but it also allows you to get all your paperwork and information ready ahead of time, like even if you don't basically just getting everything together to be like, here's my case to do this, whatever, which cuts down like a huge amount of admin. Sometimes people would do it in advance, like if they were like, I've got to go, like I've got to leave wherever I'm at, or like even on the journey they'd be like, okay, I can use a phone or a computer here and send it ahead, because they couldn't carry those things with them, all kinds of things like that. Even just scheduling appointments, otherwise they got to get there and then schedule an appointment. And also people that had appointments already booked were arriving to get there to be like, to find that their appointments had been cancelled with no notice or anything like that. So, and aside from that, they also restarted the controversial Remain in Mexico program. So, which means that you have to be staying in Mexico the entire time while you're waiting for everything to process, as opposed to before where you could, kind of like, you could go through to America and, you'd be having to check in with, like all that kind of stuff. It was pretty, this whole thing is, it really makes things hard for people, and also like people that are like actually trying to seek asylum because they're fleeing danger. It makes it a lot more dangerous for them. But basically forcing people towards the more dangerous option of like illegal border crossings. So another order calls for the US military to help seal the border to treat migrants as an invasion, which could lead to actual soldiers directly confronting people trying to migrate. So in the past, the military was only able to support local law enforcement, like not actually directly get involved themselves, which also sets a bad example of deploying the US military against civilians, which is like wild, which will obviously also be used against US civilians protesting. Trump's admin is also pushing out a massive deportation campaign targeting millions of undocumented immigrants, which requires expanding detention centers, enlisting local law enforcement, and they're looking at possibly using the military to help with the deportations as well, which is wild. Another order aims to add Mexican cartels and Latin American gangs like MS-13 to the US terrorist list, which is like, wow, because, like a terrorist and a criminal, like there's like completely different mechanisms for handling these kind of things. And it's also like, if you look at the history of like the cartels and the drug trade and all this kind of stuff like that, it's, like, I mean, there's definitely going to be a couple times where they chase some guy down to the room down the hall sort of thing, like instead of across the border. Which is, it's, this is kind of thing where it's like, I don't know exactly how effective this would be. It's definitely going to make things really complicated. And it's like the same thing over here and same thing everywhere. The line between civilians and gangs is like a wobbly line, especially in areas of like marginalized communities and areas with a lot of violence and stuff like that. We're seeing that happen here now with the government, our government cracking down on gangs, where it's like there are people that may be associated with gangs through family members or, like anything like that get swept up in all of this kind of stuff. Also he has frozen US foreign aid for 90 days to review all of their programs, which is wild, because there's obviously programs in these communities that rely on foreign aid. It is kind of, foreign aid is kind of, like this part of the neocolonialism kind of thing, where it's like getting people like kind of reliant on these foreign aid. This foreign aid means that when you pull the rug like that, it usually leads to terrible things.
It's not just that; it's also like local producers of the same things that are being exported from America as foreign aid. Like it crashes their local economy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. And aside from that, he also pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which obviously, like has huge ongoing effects to Latin American countries that are already vulnerable to climate disasters. But we need to keep the ball rolling. So, Soph, why don't you give us a little update from Rojava?
Yeah, absolutely. So recently we've been reporting on the unfolding events in Syria since the fall of the Assad regime, including direct reporting from people in the Autonomous Administration of Northeastern Syria. You might remember we had a voice note last episode. Mule read some updates that have been posted on social media. This week we have a 2.5-minute voice note recorded by Victoria Matiyova, a women's rights activist, describing the situation at the Tishrin Dam, which we'll play for you now.
My name is Victoria Matiyova, and I am a women's rights activist. I came to the Tishrin Dam in north and east Syria on the Euphrates River to bring the world's attention to the impending humanitarian disaster and the attacks on civilians that are happening at this location. For over a month now, Turkey has been attacking the dam with drone and warplane strikes in support of the Turkish proxy militias, the SNA, who are attempting to seize the dam as part of an ongoing ground offensive into North and East Syria. This hydroelectric dam provides water and power to thousands of Syrians living around the Euphrates River. Civilian convoys have been arriving at the Tishrin Dam in order to protect this essential civilian infrastructure and to defend their access to electricity and water. However, Turkey has continued striking in and around the dam, even with civilians present. As of January the 16th, Turkey started striking in the peaceful protest area set up by the civilians, who came here to protect their right to existence. The Tishrin Dam is also an important strategical point for the stability and peace of North and East Syria. The Turkish proxy militias, the SNA, are attempting to cross the dam in order to get better access to the city of Kobani. Kobani was the site of historical resistance against ISIS in 2015. For the past 14 years, North and East Syria has enjoyed a period of relative stability compared to the rest of Syria, due to the building up of a democratic, autonomous administration system, which focuses on women's rights, on ecology, and on processes of direct democracy. However, war is continuing. This is why I came here, to take a stand against this attack on humanity that Turkey is doing on this location and in north and east Syria, on the Euphrates River. And I am in awe of the local population and how they have shown up here to defend their livelihoods, to defend their human rights, and to defend their vision for a peaceful and democratic Syria.
Yeah, so that's the Tifrin Dam, vital piece of infrastructure in northeastern Syria. It's just east of the Manbij region, which is covered extensively, like the fighting there against ISIS in Alexis de Lumis's excellent documentary Belkaceba. Go watch our episode with Alexis if you want to learn more about that. Go watch, arrange a screening of his film. And in the meantime, yeah, just like all eyes on Rojava as the Turkish fascists try to encroach upon their freedoms. But for now, Mule is going to tell us about our own freedoms in good old Blighty being encroached on by top cop Keir Starmer.
Oh yeah, it's all really cool, good stuff. Keir Starmer has sunk to the lowest disapproval rating of any sitting Keir Starmer has sank to the lowest disapproval rating of any sitting Oh my god. Keir Starmer has sank to the lowest disapproval rating of any sitting British Prime Minister in history, according to YouGov. This is unsurprising, as you may know, as Red Planet has reported on Starmer's policies and cabinet choices for a long time, and the new lows could possibly be as a result of any of the following recent developments from the Labour government. New spying powers. The government, in a Tory-adjacent crackdown on so-called benefit fraudsters, can now not only access anyone's bank account information, but take money from anyone's account. Tax crackdown for non-doms flip-flop. After listening to concerns, that's a quote from Rachel Reeves herself, the Chancellor decided that the Labour policy of taxing UK non-dom residents was too nasty, and it was upsetting billionaires and people looking to avoid tax, so they decided to not do that anymore. Cutting disability benefit. Disabled people were ravaged by the Tory government, and Starmer's sick posse of evil, Hieronymus Bosch berserk-style demons have decided it wasn't enough. So, time to cut more disability benefits. Slammed by an overwhelming number of politicians in UK Parliament. The plan will actually be quite difficult to pursue, as it was originally a Tory initiative, which was being investigated for quite some time by a court that has now recently deemed the motion unlawful. So, they're going to find it quite hard to do this thing that they've said. I'm sure they'll try their very best, though. And, of course, the attacks on trans people and migrants, the ban on puberty blockers and continued oppression of trans people in the NHS is an ongoing attempt at erasing trans people from society, and these are incredibly unpopular policies. Starmer's increased police powers to support immigration patrols has led to a record number of deportations in the UK. It's almost like the government never changed. And finally, in bringing it back to Donald J. Trump, not only did Kid Starver congratulate Trump on his election win and voice his excitement at becoming Tony Blair 2, Electric Boogaloo, even more by having a new special relationship, but his cabinet and number 10 have said nothing about Elon Musk's Nazi salute after Trump's inauguration on the 20th of January. So just a bit of a neoliberal Kid Starver, Keith dickhead update for you there from the UK. Prime Minister. Tim, tell us about the anti-fascist march in Germany.
So around 15,000 people traveled to Riesa, Germany to protest the far-right Alternative for Germany party conference. That's the AfD, Alternative for Germany, AfD, AF in German. Germany
Alternative
is
for Deutschland.
Yeah. So but the AfD for short, which is polling second ahead of national elections. So they have a history of promoting racist and fascist ideas, including plans for mass deportations of non-ethnic Germans. Protesters aimed to block the conference and show opposition to the party's extremist agenda. The AfD is led by figures like Bjorn Hock, who has been convicted for using Nazi slogans, which, Germany takes it really seriously when you do Nazi-branded Nazi shit. However, if you do off-brand Nazi shit, like Israeli stuff, it's totally fine. So the party employs over 100 hardcore Nazis in parliament and openly advocates for a German ethno-state, including the mass deportations. Their rhetoric and policies have drawn comparisons to historical fascism, making them a major threat to the marginalized communities of Germany. A key development this year was the rise of student activism against the AfD, with thousands attending university meetings to organize against the far right. Trade unions also played a significant role, with Germany's second largest union, Verdi, supporting the protests by subsidizing bus tickets for members. Even Tesla workers joined the protests despite CEO Elon Musk's support for the AfD. Elon has publicly promoted the AfD, even sharing a live stream from inside their conference hall on his Twitter account. This endorsement aligns with the AfD's far-right anti-immigrant agenda, which Musk openly supports and amplifies through his platform. Despite Musk's backing of the AfD, a group of Tesla auto workers joined the anti-fascist protests in Riesa. These workers, who generate Musk's wealth, stood in direct opposition to his support for the AfD, showing that not everyone within his company shares his far-right sympathies. Their presence at the protests highlighted a clear divide between Musk's politics and the values of some of his employees. Despite freezing temperatures, protesters maintained blockades for hours, successfully disrupting the AfD conference. However, police eventually cleared the blockades using violent tactics, including truncheons, pepper spray, and attack dogs. One parliament observer was beaten unconscious. The protest in Riesa is part of a broader struggle against the rise of far-right movements across Europe and beyond, with the AfD gaining momentum, the Freedom Party in power in Austria, and Donald Trump's influence in the US. Anti-fascist activists stress the need for continued resistance. The AfD's distribution of deportation-themed election flyers after the conference shows their confidence, making ongoing mobilization crucial. I'm not sure if anyone saw, but just before, maybe like a week or two ago, the AfD sent out flyers advertising, their party that were literally just like plane tickets, like that, basically being like, we're going to send the immigrants home. And they say that there's no evidence of them doing it, but a lot of people are saying that these were dropped in majority immigrant and refugee communities. Like they sent them plane tickets saying like you're next, basically. And these guys are polling second at the moment. So the protests were a powerful stand against fascism, but with the far right on the rise, activists know that this is just the beginning of a much larger fight. Speaking of, what is happening over in London, Soph, with Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah, sure thing. This is a pretty wacky one. So Jeremy Corbyn was at a Palestine protest, and it got a little hairy. And he's been called in for questioning by the police, which is a bizarre headline to see when it's been going around, but it's just that he was there and he's a person of note. Basically, he didn't do anything particularly cool. There were mass arrests after a Palestine protest went ahead in London against a Met Police order. So last weekend in London, the March of Palestine supporters, thousands strong, clashed with the Metropolitan Police, leading to over 70 arrests. And former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, as well as his, I think he was going to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell, being taken in for questioning. The march organizers' Palestine Solidarity Campaign decided to go ahead despite the police trying to ban the protest, because fuck that, right? It's just setting a horrible precedent for the police being able to just shut down any big protest that they want to shut down. This is like one of the largest anti-war protests or protest movements in general in recent British history, and people care a lot about it. And so they just decided to go ahead and show how much they care about it by just doing the protest anyway. It's an interesting moment in recent British protest history, because with the heightened police powers, protesters have been a little bit more meek ever since they came in saying you can get in a lot of trouble, and we can hand out these big sentences. And it's interesting to see because on social media, people have been circulating videos the march broke police lines and overwhelmed police, and they just the police did not have the numbers. The crowd were people who all knew they were showing up to a protest the police weren't going to be happy with, and so there was a lot more consciousness that there are more of us than there are of them. There was a lot more consciousness that we have the numbers and we can overpower them. At the same time, the police were making just seemingly random arrests. There were these ridiculous videos circulating of arrests from close up where people are saying like to the police, like, what are you doing? What are you arresting this person for? So one woman getting arrested and they were asking like, what are you arresting her for? And the police are just saying being in this area is illegal because they put down an order saying
you got a license to be in this area, mate.
And yeah, just like it was just completely absurd, right? Like they're just there are thousands and thousands of people in this area because they've said you can't be in this area because they don't want the protest to happen. People show up, and what can they do? Just grab a bunch of them. So they arrested over 70 people. Fucking ridiculous. With the ceasefire agreement having just been announced and the ceasefire coming in the day after, like a lot of these protesters were just there to like mourn how many people had died, as well as to call for like further and beyond the ceasefire. Like these are anti-war protesters, and the police are just grabbing like dozens of them. And it's sickening, but it's also like a sickening display that I think is done right in the face of people who have an enormous amount of class consciousness, and it's cool to see like the propaganda of the deed being done where people are realizing there are more of us and then demonstrating it with collective power. Mule, speaking of clashes with the state, tell us what's going on in Colombia.
Yeah, absolutely. Over 80 have been killed in fighting in Colombia between the FARC and the ELN. So over 80 people have been killed in just 3 days in northeast Colombia's Catatumbo region after peace talks with the National Liberation Army, the ELN, rebel group failed. The ELN launched an attack on a rival group made up of ex-members of the disbanded FARC, leading to intense clashes that trapped civilians in the crossfire. The violence has displaced around 5,000 people, with many fleeing to nearby mountains or seeking refuge in government shelters. The Governor William Villamizar described the situation as, quote, alarming, with families escaping on foot, motorcycles and trucks to avoid the fighting. At least 24 people have been injured. Colombia has deployed more than 5,000 soldiers to the region to reinforce security and establish a humanitarian corridor for those fleeing the violence. Special urban soldiers have also been sent to municipal capitals to address the widespread fear and risk faced by residents. The violence has derailed President Gustavo Petro's efforts to negotiate, quote, total peace with the ELN. The ELN accused ex-FARC members of attacking civilians, including the killing of a couple and their 9-month-old baby, and warned that armed confrontation was inevitable if such acts continued. Despite the 2016 peace deal that disarmed the Despite the 2016 peace deal that disarmed the FARC, violence persists in Colombia due to clashes between leftist groups like the ELN, right-wing paramilitaries, and drug cartels. These groups continue to fight over resources and drug trafficking routes, particularly in regions like Catatumbo, which is a major cocaine-producing area near the Venezuelan border. Obviously, the ELN, I'm not entirely sure of the ELN's entire politics at this time, but they are described as leftist. I think we've maybe had a look at them in the past, but we will keep an eye on this and see if there's any potential actual, based things to support that the ELN are doing. At the moment, it does appear to be, basically due to unsettled kind of grievances with the FARC and FARC basically attacking people and stuff like that. So
yeah, it's pretty wild over there, like with the FARC and ELN and stuff. Who even the FARC, there's they're a revolutionary group that then recently became an actual political party, but then the people in this story, the FARC, are still a splinter group that were actually, no, we're gonna stay out in the jungle and do that kind of stuff. And it's it's wild out there. There's both the FARC and ELN are are leftist groups, but then with the splinter FARC groups, some of them are right-wing militias, and there's a huge overlap with the drug trade, and there's all kinds of wild stuff there. It's really the Wild West out there. But it's super, super hard to keep track of some of the stuff going on there, because it'll be oh, this is a FARC, or this is a FARC EP. This is it's just
difficult.
It's the wild stuff
to overlook it.
Yeah.
Well, don't forget, everybody, we do have a Patreon, and please give us money via that. It's patreon.com/red_planet. There are various different tiers of which you can subscribe, and you can do that, and it's good and it's great for us. But now on to our guest, and as we talk more, I don't know, did anyone else have an intro for this? Because I just kind of was going to do one off the cuff. Okay, no one's got an intro for it. I'm just going to do one. As we get more and more into organising and telling our audience how to organise, it is extremely important to think about the ways in which we organise. And one of the things that we tend to rely on quite often is tech and software and all that kind of business. And our guest today, Kim Foale from Geeks for Social Change, is basically trying to facilitate that for a lot of people. Kim, introduce yourself. Hi, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Geeks for Social Change.
Hi, yeah, nice to see you all. Yeah, I'm good. I have to say though, this new year has not felt like a reset for me. That's the main thing I'm struggling with. It's felt like normally, everything's grim, and then you have like Christmas and New Year, and then you're like, January. Surely this will be a fresh restart. But this year it's just like, no, everything's lined up to be really awful.
The horrors
Yeah,
persist.
yeah, absolutely. It's like with speed running, like all of the terrible things that could happen in a year, and just trying to do it in like a month. Like,
Yeah. So yeah, and it's funny actually. We have a tiny announcement today that I'll tell you a little bit about Geeks for Social Change. Was there an intro question there? I think I just started moaning about New Year.
Oh no, yeah. So I was just going to ask you first of all, just to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Geeks for Social Change.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Kim. I run a little, and this is what we'll get to later. I run a little studio in Manchester called Geeks for Social Change. It's kind of always been a weird mix of like, I was doing a load of activism and I was trying to do some web work for like small organizations and stuff like that. And then I also kind of did a PhD part-time and finished that, and doing it while you're disabled and then figuring out, you're autistic and all this stuff going on. So it's kind of this big mess. And then I think like I think it started out as like a reading group, and then it was like a freelance thing. And I think like a lot of stuff, and I think this is what we'll get onto later on the call. I think fundamentally my project has always just been like, how can we actually build the shit we need to survive, And like that's been scrappy and it's been difficult. So like, yeah, the last few years we've had it, I had a couple huge funding successes and found a philanthropist group that supported us, and now that's all gone and it's like back to just me again, and it's like reevaluating everything that's going on. So I think that's about the crux of it. But I'd say at the core of our work, I think what we're really trying to do is build an actual like community situated tech practice, right? So, 99.9% of all the tech everyone uses is kind of, made by gigantic tech companies, most of them in California or similar countries. There's a model for it where basically a billionaire lends you some money and then you make a company and you sell it, right? This is the startup model we all know well. And then outside of that, and that's almost all the software we use every day. So we're all just like on the computer. And I think it just makes it really, really, really difficult to build anything else, because you're starting from this position of like, well, everyone's standards up here because they're used to software you get when you spend millions and millions of pounds on it. And yet, right. And I think anyone who's ever tried to build anything on the left has been here, right? Like imagine simply just having access to the infrastructure and the networks and the money. I can't imagine how easy their life is, So I think, is that enough intro?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. And it is such a good, thing to consider, because it's exactly as you said, owned by all these billionaires. These billionaires, their main interest is definitely not grassroots activism. It's definitely not revolutionary, activism. It is in their interests are in capital. Their interests are therefore in imperialism and essentially fascism. For example, I think most organizations that I'm involved with, I know GMTU definitely do a lot of this. Even the show that you're on right now does all their notes on Google Docs, and obviously Google Docs, not Google Docs, Google the company have indeed essentially been supplying AI and various different bits of software to Israel in the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and ongoing genocide in Gaza. It's such a really important thing. Talk to us a bit like about the kind of things that you've sort of done already and the successes that you've had, and you could even tell us about some of the struggles as well, because that shit's important.
Yeah. So I think the confusing thing we have is, because we're trying to develop this other approach, we're kind of in that position where it all feels like it takes so much like spiel, because we've had to sort of develop a methodology and then some tech alongside it. So I think the biggest thing we've done that some of our other projects have split off is a project called Place Cow. So this emerged from, I happen to be in a neighborhood where there's some age-friendly participatory grant-making work going on. So this is like over 50s. And I live in Hume in Manchester. In fact, yeah, I met Mule in the pub. That's how I ended up here. So yeah, hi.
Yep.
um, but basically, people were going, there's nothing to do in my neighborhood. They're having residence forums asking everyone what could make their neighborhood friendlier. And everyone's saying there's nothing to do. And we're like, okay, well, what is there to do? Then, at the time, there's a community development officer and they just went around all the groups and were like, can we just make a Google Calendar of everything that's happening? And of course there's loads. But what it's like, right? Like, and that, most organizations, especially now, I think it's got worse from when we started. Most organizations like don't have a website. They don't have social media. They might have they've usually, nowadays the combo seems to be there's an Instagram and then maybe there's a WhatsApp group if you can get on it, right?
Yep.
And it wasn't quite this bad when we started, and like no one just So at the start of it, we went round and we were like, well, surely everyone's keeping a calendar at the moment somewhere, right? There's got to be a calendar to book the space. So we went around and we found, some people were using Outlook or Google Calendar. They were the most popular one, especially for like community centers and stuff. And those things have a feature called iCal, which is a plain text format you can use to sync calendars together, which if you've used the same calendar on your phone and your computer, you've used it. And then other things, there's other open formats too. So there's like Eventbrite has got an API you can access and pull the data out. Some sites have got this thing called linked data, which just means you can just look at the page and there's a computer representation of it in there. So basically what PlaceCal does, the software, so what the approach is we work with a neighborhood. We say, who are all the groups in the partnership? Let's work with them all individually to find out what they're using and like upskill them a bit to use what they're already using a little bit better. And then the software like aggregates it all. and that was simple when it was one neighborhood, right? So we're doing one neighborhood, one place, scraping everything, big list of events, great. And I think in our pilot, we were up to something like 250 events a week, which was just like bonkers, right?
That's wild.
Right? That was just Hume. 250 events a week.
Sounds about right for Hume, to be honest. Hume is where the heart is, as they say,
Yeah. And, a lot of it's just like, who knows what's going on at the Zion Center, right? Like literally, it's like up the road from me and I never know what's on there. Yeah. The only way to find out, most places go in and look at the notice board, right? And even then, like, oh, look, something from 8 months ago that no one's taken down, great. So then we scaled it up a bit and we were like, okay, well, we need it to work on this location basis, but we also need to make it work with different interests because they were the things people doing. And anyway, I'm compressing a lot of time now because we're going with it a bit, but effectively now what we've made it is so that once a group's been added to the back end and they've been supported by like a real person who hopefully they already know in their community, which is like the key to the whole thing, right? Because no one wants to get advice from some IT dickhead. This is like the center of our policy. We should frame it. You can then output it. You can output all the partners and events for like any combination of area and interest. So our biggest success for this is called the transdimension.uk. This has got its own custom front end and lots of other nice stuff. But we did this with Gender Intelligence in London. So, a Twitter poll we put out, we got some funding from Paul Hamlin to do it. It was quite nice. That funding doesn't exist anymore, obviously. But, we put out, I think we did a Twitter poll of people following Jay on Twitter and the median groups people knew about was like 3. So again, we go out there like, what is that? Okay, there's all these wikis and all these sites and all these other things out, but they're all out of date. And this is the real thing that we focus on is this curation. So there is someone usually in the community who wants to do this curation work. And it's finding that person and raising them up and supporting them to do it is our approach. So I think on that site now, for trans groups in London, there's about 50 groups. And there's things on literally every day which just blow everyone's mind, like you can go on there and there'll be something on today. Manchester, we're just getting up and running. We found it's quite quick to get the people on the listing, but then getting them to connect up with the events takes quite a while. But hopefully we're going to get that up and running next month. And
it's really good. I can see. I just went on the website now and it's like, you could just scroll through and it's got all the different, various different events that you could go to. It's got like Bent, which is the event night that I went to for Alternative Pride, Ancoats Quiz Night, Social Refuge. It's really good. I love this.
Cool. And like we're saying, it's completely automatic. So you're not in that situation. Like, my partner works at the library and basically they're just asked to add, oh, can you add your events to this and this and this and this and this and this? And we've all used these things, right? And they've got 4,000 fields. So just by taking this approach of like, you publish it however you want, and then we'll take it from there. Like, it's very complicated technologically, but that's what the tech should be doing, right? The hard bit. So yeah, so hopefully we'll have it, we'll do a relaunch in Manchester as soon as we've done another, we need to get a bunch more calendars on, so yeah, that's kind of, so I think that's an example of the approach. And we called this, the community technology partnership approach. And it's based on this, I don't know how much theory you want, but it's based a little bit on this Spinozist idea of like getting people together to identify a shared problem and then helping them creatively address it together for a shared outcome, right? So it's like we're sort of taking the shift away from the individual and putting it on the community. Like, I like to say, not everyone needs to be a brain surgeon, right? But you kind of hope there's one in your city if you're in hospital. And I think that's the problem we've got into with tech, especially from like the open source movement, is it's like, oh, I'd like to find out a bit more about this. Okay, install Linux. And you're just like, oh my God.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Huge accessibility barrier straight away.
Right.
Yeah, and it's difficult. Like, and it's even with using Microsoft and stuff like that. People are now just realizing Microsoft's involvement in various unethical things. I mean, obviously Microsoft, the Bill Gates Foundation has been involved with multiple unethical schemes and activities over the decades, and it's just kind of one of those things where it's like these systems that we use will not save us. They will not participate. It is, you could obviously make an argument that like, oh well, we might as well use them while we can get away with it, but how much of our information do we truly want within the vast data banks of these evil corporations? So no, that's an absolutely phenomenal. I think that you're absolutely right, like focusing on the first deal is letting people know what's going on in their area, because I do kind of find that, like, for example, if I make a video and I'm trying to tell people to get organized, it's kind of like, oh well, where do I tell them where to go? What resources can I give them? I'm gonna give them like the iww.org website, and I'm gonna give them tenantfederation.org, and hopefully they'll find the way with that kind of a thing. So I think that beginning idea of just having this huge decentralized wallboard website of like all the places that you could go to meet people who not just like you, but also like probably share your politics, probably share your material conditions, and therefore politics, and so that is just going to be the best way for us to build community power, and eventually power within each of our social classes that we inhabit. Talk to us a bit more about like how you got started and what was the sort of like the main driving force behind this. We obviously like to talk a lot about the activism that people do and like what the organizations do with the people that come on regarding this, but if you go a bit into sort of like where it sort of like came from, and the sort of like we don't mind how much detail. I know you said before you don't know how much theory we want you to go into, but please, we've got like an hour and a half, so or even more, I think, like an hour and 40 minutes, so don't hesitate to go on. Lots, please.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, where did it come from? I mean, it feels like one of those life's work things, like I said, so I think in about 2015 I graduated from my PhD, which was about soundscapes. It's kind of interesting, but not really what I wanted to do by the time I finished it. I did it part-time because I was disabled, and then because I was disabled, I also had to get a job. So I was making I was making websites for, like I said, for like, small community groups. And then also just like doing this crazy activist work. And I think I knew in my heart that like the crazy activist work was like where my heart is, and the rest was just a route to that. But then I think especially a few pieces started to come together. So the thing is, I'm going to say something a little bit controversial, which is I feel like a lot of supposedly left-wing movements are quite anti-worker, and that they don't actually want to invest in like professionals who are really good at what they do. They want to like skimp. So a lot of the time what I was getting was I was just doing all these briefs where someone's got $3,000. It was always $3,000. It still always is $3,000. And they want a website. But when they say they want a website, what they really mean is we've got all these problems and I want you to fix them all for this sum of money I pre-decided, right? And actually everyone's like reproducing the same thing. So we've formed a partnership now with some other tech studios, and this is where a lot of our work's going through. And we've got this fairly consistent thing where like again, it's something that big tech's made you think, but everyone's so solution orientated. It's like the whole premise of an app. It's like a little thing on your phone, and it's like a little magic wand, and you'll wave it, and a problem will go away. But isn't it funny how like thousands of apps later, in fact, all of our problems are worse, right? So a lot of it's just about like taking those steps back and going, what are we trying to achieve here? So I think like at its root, technology is a social process. Technology is for making social processes easier, right? But like the idea of which social processes we want to make easier and which ones we want to make harder is obviously like completely obscured deliberately by big tech. So like you're not encouraged to think about that. You're just encouraged to like install Blue Sky. And like, okay, why? Right? No one really knows why we're on these stupid microblogging sites. Because honestly,
that's so true. Oh God.
and it takes up so much energy. Just like, and I think this is also why I'm really just into the doing. I think I'm now of an age where I'm just really bored of like this idea that we just come up with the perfect critique and somehow our problems will go away. And it's like I just like building things, I think, and I like building them with friends, and that's fundamentally what I'm trying to get back to. So
yeah. No, I was just gonna say, like, I was actually discussing this like with my partner last night. It's kind of like it's all well and good when people have this very clear understanding of like, I guess, theory, like, but I think you should always be a little cautious when someone describes themselves as like, for example, like only a Marxist, because it's like, all right, so you agree with Marx, you agree with all Marx's writings, but it's like, well, what then? Like, it's kind of like you've got to sort of ask yourself, like, there's only so much that you can do with critiquing. You just absolutely have to like move and do something, such as the premise of this show, actually. But yeah, sorry, I cut you off there. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. And I think that's it, right? I think it's actually, I don't know if you read this book, Joyful Militancy. It's absolutely fascinating, but like it really just outlines this idea of like, so in the Spinoza's term, joy is a feeling of an increase in capability, right? So like we do a thing together, we build a bond, we make a relationship, we get on better. Our capability increases because I know what you can do, you know what I can do. Now next time you're in a pickle or you want to make something, you can do it together. And then you have a decrease in capability when a decrease in joy is when you have a decrease in capability. So for a lot of people, this can be things like getting disabled, or which everyone does as they get older, right? Or it can be getting more socially isolated, or it can be losing a friend, or all these other things. And I think you can really sense this. And I think for me, like it gave a version of anarchism that finally really spoke to who I was, which is like, and I think this comes around to what the current mission is. So we're basically in the process of relaunching as a community, basically a community of people who want to do this doing piece. And I think, we've got a new blog up, we're going to start, but most of all, I think actually on the left, we're really bad at talking about our process. And I think this shows one of the few places where I see you talking about just like what you've been doing this week as an activist, but really like, I think one of the most dramatic things I did was like, we did this report on taser use by Greater Manchester Police with a group called Resistance Lab I set up in 2020, first year of pandemic when everyone had like all the energy.
Yeah.
And we got, we got the police data, we did a load of presentation, we did a load of data stuff. It was just this huge report kind of, edited by like 5 academics with like data science and all the rest of it. We made a zine and we were handing them out, and it was really made a dent, right? You could feel how scared they were of us, and all of a sudden they were talking about tasers, and then like a few months later I caught them in a lie where they put one thing on a PowerPoint to the community and they put a different thing on the police statistics. And anyway, the Guardian didn't want to publish it because they couldn't work out how to work a toggle on a spreadsheet, which was just like whatever. But then you finish it and you put this massive report out in the world and it's great, but then I don't think it really encouraged anyone to like try and do the same. It's like this, it was too high, right? And all the work leading up to that we'd done in private, so it was like just completely inaccessible. And I think it's like, well, I'm really proud of that piece of work we did. I think for me, it's like bringing it back to this level of like, if there's any future for like organizing the left, it's like, I think people have to change their idea of who an organizer is. It's the person in the pub who's organizing the hangouts. Do you know what I mean? It's the chess group at the library. It's like the people, like my friend was telling me about, the people in communities everywhere who just fucking get on with it and don't need to define themselves as leftists to do it. Right?
Well, it's like we have that capitalist realism I guess, understanding of what an organizer is. We can't.
Right.
It's organizer is a leftist thing to do. Organizing is a leftist. Well, lots of people do it, but organizing against capitalism, it's a leftist thing to do. But we still think of like, oh well, the organizer is the head organizer, the person who's in charge, who's been elected or has got that position. They've done the interview and now they're the head organizer. They get paid for it, and it's like, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like an organizer is just a person who does stuff. Like it's doing the stuff that makes things happen, which is why it's so good. And again, like, a lot of the process you were talking about, like people don't talk about their process, and I've tried to get into that a bit about what we do at GMTU, because people really need to know just how simple it is. It's not this like huge, terrifying, unknowable thing. It's like you just write things down, unfortunately in a Google Doc, and then things are decided and voted on, and that's how things work, which is why your work is so interesting, and what you want to do with Geeks for Social Change is so good, because like getting away from that tech and getting away from that like that big tech version of actually organizing is so important, because a lot of it is just that. It's just doing stuff on Google Docs. Yeah.
And I think, it's like you said, all the tools are fine, but yeah, and I think I just really want to emphasize this. I think everyone who's been in activism a while, you get in this position, don't you, where it's like, you realize no one gave me permission to do any of this. I just decided, right? And that's like that's basically just what direct action is, right? It's just deciding you're going to be the one to get up and do it. But then I think every group I've been in, they have this tendency. I've stopped being in such big groups now where like they start out with like 2-3 people and it's kind of friends and they just get on with it and they're really productive and they're producing stuff and everyone thinks they're bigger than they are. And all of a sudden they grow. But the number of people doing stuff doesn't grow. It's like, I think there's so much of the structure at the moment where it's like, I don't know how, I think fundamentally what radicalizes anyone is personal to them and we don't know what it is. But I'm just really keen on just like, because I think my bottom line at the moment is, and I put this on the blog post, I'll share in a second in the chat, but like, capitalism has failed, right? Governments are making it pretty clear they're not going to help us. Corporations definitely aren't. We're like, in fact, the rate at which bad people are being rewarded is going up and it's accelerating. And everyone I know who's trying to do like a good project in their community has no funding, is fucked, is burnt out. And I think I'm just at the point where it's like, okay, so we just have to get on with it, don't we? We don't really have a choice. It's like, we just have to start building our own infrastructure and just stop pretending that there's anyone else out there who's going to like help. And I think like, to me, that feels like a much more positive position to cite my politics than just like being mad at stuff all the time,
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like I was talking to my girlfriend just today about how the right has so many people whose job it is to do their politics, and so like they get it done, right? Because it's their job. Because when something's your job, you just get it done because someone's told you to and they're paying you to do it. And like this isn't like any kind of advocacy for there to be more like employed leftists, like employed in doing the revolution for a salary. Like if that's possible, that's great. Yeah. But like it's just we have to just take it as seriously as doing a job that we're paid for, and hopefully if we apply a bit of common sense about that, like just pragmatism about that, we just see that like if we're then organizing in a way that will get us our needs met, then we can afford to treat it as seriously.
Yeah. And I think for sure the other thing I'm really keen on is a transition period. I think actually I would love it if there was loads more employed leftists. I think if everyone the last few years, I mean, I found it really stressful. I mean, it's back to just being me again, running it, but the peace of mind a stable income gives you, holy shit. It's like it changes everything, and then it makes you stable, and it means that you can start accommodating other things and other people. And I think when everyone's got no money and everyone's traumatized, it's not great. And it's funny too, because I think a lot about like, if you think about the Black Panther Party and all that stuff, all the places that was organized are like hair salons and stuff, right? And I don't feel like we have that now. All the third spaces have gone.
Yeah.
But like my neighborhood doesn't, I mean, maybe in London it's a bit different, but like, my neighborhood doesn't have like an anarchist bakery or like a hairdresser or like, and I think just the importance of that day-to-dayness of it is really key for me, right? Like no one wants to be, I mean, present company aside, right? I mean, this is a broadcast, but no one wants to be on a Zoom meeting at 7:00 in the evening. I think about that Oscar Wilde quote about the problem with socialism is it takes up too many evenings. I really believe that so hard. It's like, I want to be doing things that are like inherently fun, right? There's got to, if it's fun or like it pays me or like it's survival, right?
Yeah.
And somehow like so much organizing is just none of those things, and then we wonder why we have capacity issues.
Arguably, the most effective my organizing was when I was like doing the job that I just left. When I had so much space in between calls that I was able to just go on my fucking laptop and do GMTU organizing while I was like at work. Like you could say I was in work mode. Do you know what I mean? Like I was just ready to go, and that I got a lot of stuff done. Like and I actually surprised myself. I was like, well, yeah, I think unfortunately some of those pretty cringe phrases that capitalism likes to offer us, like for example, my fucking dad loves this one. I can't stand it. Put your shoes on, not your slippers. He says it all the time to me, and it's like it basically means like when you get up in the morning, don't put your slippers on. Just like get your shoes on, get ready to go out, do the grind, you know. But it's cringe and it's annoying, especially if you're like talking about capitalism. But I guess if we're talking about the revolution, like the only thing that you can do, like, you know, Al Qassam brigades in fucking Gaza are definitely putting their fucking boots on as soon as they wake up. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of one of those. And I know it's a different situation, but yeah, we really got to recognize our privilege. And I think a lot of what you're saying there comes down to that, right? Is that in the Imperial Core we have that privilege where, you know, all right, you know, I might be poor as fuck, but I've got my fucking Netflix. Do you know what I mean? I've got like I could go around the corner and I can see my mate and he'll buy me a pint. I can go down the road and I can see my mate, she'll get me a fucking, you know, a spliff or whatever. And I think that's like quite a lot of it is that we're so like focused on this, you know, the very hedonistic society that is, you know, promoted here. And you know, I'm not like a fucking, what do you want to call it? Like, you know, hardline, sober, I guess, like religious person or anything like that. I think everyone should be allowed to do drugs and have a good time. But like, you know, genuinely, I think a lot of like what you're saying does come from that,
and
like
spluttering at the idea of straight edge mule.
Yeah, you know, like it's just not me. Like, you know, I think both of you, like, well, Sophie's definitely seen me not straight edge, and Kim, I think the first time you met me, I was super not straight edge.
Yeah, me too.
So, you know, yeah, that's that really. But like, that's kind of what I'm saying. It's that non-recognition. I guess like it's a form of, when you're not class conscious, you're blind to your class, you're blind to your material conditions. You know, it's being blind to that privilege as well. Like it's not seeing like how much like time and space and energy that we have. Like Sophie, your video was great talking about, you know, Trump and stuff like that. And I think that like I might be wrong. I think you had a bit in there about how like it will get worse for people in the US, but like arguably it will be a lot better still than for people in the imperial periphery, right? It's like that the you know, people in those other fucking countries are just not like, you know, they don't have like anything close to what we have because of the chaos that is sown by the empire. So I think it's about recognizing that and trying to actually just get some fucking work done and you know, waking up essentially, isn't it?
I liked what you said, Kim, about like, you know, a lack of spaces that are just like, yeah, I mean, like you said, there's you don't have an anarchist bakery nearby or whatever, and it's just like I have like two kind of not counterpoints to what you said, but like juxtaposed examples that come to mind. And one is like, I know about people who I think anarchists who I think were in Hackney who were feeding people, and that was great. Like that's huge, right? But then who the other day Mule said to his girlfriend, ask Sophie about organizing stories, she's got great ones. And I was like, why'd you say that? He was just like, you've got awful ones. But like it was like anarchists in Hackney who were like feeding people so they could come in for a lecture about what anarchism is. And it's just like, what are you doing? Just feed them. Are you kidding me? Just feed them. And another one is just like, it's less one example and just more like, I think there are a lot of spaces where people, where leftists can go and do leftist culture things, I guess is how you describe it. Like there are events that are for leftists. But then like, I think a lot of the places where they're doing something that is actually direct action, like it is actually feeding people just like, or whatever. Those spaces tend to be like the community centers or sometimes they're churches or whatever, that like of marginalized, often like racialized communities, because they've just been like, this is survival, so we're just going to do this thing, and then like people will get food, like will get fed. And like then there's by contrast, like, and I think that again, I do think that people having spaces to just go and engage in radicalizing and like leftist culture is good, but when like that's all a space does, it's just
Oh
it's
yeah,
just
I
like
agree.
it's just a
Yeah.
social club for leftists.
Yeah.
Like,
To be honest, I think like everyone else here, right? I actually cringe every time I say left and every time I say activist and every time I say organizer. I think I need to work on some new vocabulary because I think there's some base things here, right? Which are like almost everyone every day is just trying to have their base needs met in terms of being warm, living somewhere nice, having nice food, having comfort, right? And actually, like what capitalism is it's like the ability to trade investments, right? Almost all of us are only interacting with basically like a market economy at a local level. And it gets like so twisted and so complicated where it's just like actually I'm realizing, I have quite a lot in common with some of sort of like transition towns or just like places that want to plant flowers everywhere to make it look pretty. Like those projects are really based, in my opinion, and they bring in a wide audience of people to do them and they look really nice. And then I think so the wild thing with tech is just to bring it back a tiny bit. I think the final click I had in my head the other day, I went to New York for the first time last year and I was chatting to some Americans we met on the way, and it's just the thing I didn't realize is that because the state there doesn't do anything to support you, everyone's pensions are in index funds, right? And the index funds are linked to the stock market. And the only stocks that are performing well are like tech companies, which are all trading on AI. So it's not just that like people need AI to work because they think it should do. It's like literally no one gets a fucking pension if it doesn't. And I hadn't quite made that connection before. Right.
That's so fucked.
And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and now
ooh,
almost my view of AI now is it's like this, it's the ultimate conclusion of like this surveillance culture where actually like they want to remove any commitment they have to society at all. And it is just pure colonialism, empire acting in its purest form, like the sun, like bleaching everything on Earth, and they don't care what they'll take to get there. I think that's like that's my full thread of this now. I think it's actually very like end times. And my personal opinion too is that the singularity is here, and everyone thought the singularity was going to be this like, HAL 9000 that like gets conscious and takes over everything. But actually, it turns out most jobs are bullshit, handing pieces of paper around to other people who have pieces of paper who tick them off. And it turns out if you can do a good job of making a piece of paper in an office look like you've done some work, you can kind of keep a job. And apparently that's our entire economy. So I feel like pretty soon we're
yeah,
going to
and
hit
then
a
you get
point
your
where
share
like,
of imperial plunder.
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
actually speaking of like the AI stuff. Before we started the stream, we were just talking about the DeepSeek AI stuff and how that's totally like because then now I was thinking about it like, oh wow, this is gonna, like Nvidia has this giant inflated stock price. Everyone's investing in that because of like OpenAI was exclusively using NVIDIA chipsets, and now DeepSeek AI comes out. It's open source, made for a fraction of the cost, a lot more efficient, and they've just got it working with like AMD chipsets, and it's like, like to me, I was thinking, haha, that's funny. All those people are going to lose all their money. I'm like, oh fuck, those are people's pensions and stuff as well. Because in New Zealand, we also have like a Kiwi Saver thing that it's like the government is investing our, like a superannuation sort of thing in, things just like this, which is, one of those things where it's like you just become the Joker,
Yeah.
you just got a lot.
I think
mean,
honestly,
go on, Kim.
I was gonna say, I think all you have to really know about AI is that Sam Altman is like a weird prepper who has his own private nuclear bunker with equipment he bought from the IDF, and he brags about it on Twitter. So how is it that we have a man who has a personal plan to go and live in his own nuclear bunker with his survival gear?
Yeah.
Why are we taking anything this man predicts about the future seriously? I just can't quite like.
Well, it's
It
good
seems
that
like all of those
absolutely.
dudes get to that point where they all start preparing for their own, like, like you get to a certain point of wealth and then you just get convinced that societal collapse is imminent. And instead of being like, how do I use my immense wealth and resources to,
What
to
could have
stop
caused
this
this
or predict
societal
people?
collapse?
It's like,
We're all looking
instead,
for the
I'm
guy
going
who
to
did
learn
this.
Krav Maga and I'm going to like buy a bunker. Yeah, you know,
I want to
wild.
just wind back a second to something you
Yeah.
said a minute ago, Kim, which was like the singularity is here, like the end of history we've had, where like people are just doing bullshit jobs and like handing a piece of paper that they've signed to each other to like sign it and check another box on it or whatever. Like that is fascinating to me because I think a lot about how like the confluence of surveillance and AI is like trying to turn everyone and everything into data. And like the imperialist concept of immortality is that like everything that happens will be recorded. Like we just have social media will just turn, like there's that Bo Burnham interview where he's like, they're just coming for every single waking moment you have. They want to turn it all into a commodity. And just like the idea that we will all be turned into like commodity into data, and like there will be a perfect record of absolutely everything remembered by an AI we've made, and then we will have won, because that's just immortality, is us all just doing like shit boring jobs, but like we're all recorded completely, and therefore we're perfect.
So depressing. So yeah, and I think this is so really like the other thing that I think I'm trying to do with this community tech model is kind of linked to that, which is like, okay, so actually there's a way that actually the most futuristic thing we can do is just assume that everything everyone's saying about the climate is going to happen and the world economy, assume stuff's going to get worse. And then I think for me, it's almost coming down to this question of like, what does survival look like over a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And I mean, survival, because that means something different if you're like trans, if you're Palestinian, if you're just someone who wants to eat food or breathe the air. I think it's actually going to become such a like a central thing to how we have to start thinking about things, because right now everything feels so siloed to me. Like there's climate stuff over there and migrant stuff over there and anti-cop stuff over there, and there's just loads of mad people arguing about it on social media, and like and I think like because I'm old enough that when I first got involved in organizing, the only way you could go to do a queer thing was to just show up. If you wanted to be involved in the live music scene, you just had to show up to a show. If you wanted to get involved in organizing a squat, you had to just show up. And like, sure, there was like indie media where you could sort of get pointed in the right direction, but it wasn't like this thing now where everyone's their own personal like, influencer for themselves, right? And I think it's made everything weird, but I think we almost have to get back to that a bit, where it's like we just have to show up. And I'm disabled, I struggle to get out, like it's not easy, and especially as all the places are going, but there's definitely this connection between like how bad things are getting, and with yeah, I'm gonna try it off there.
No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on it. The main aim of what we have to, if we're talking about what must be done, like what has to happen, is that everything has to be decentralized, right? We have to seize our means of healthcare. We have to seize our means of food production. We have to seize our means of energy. And we at the end of the day, it's one of those things. Like in an ideal world, that is what's going to happen eventually. Because obviously, ideally we don't want states doing this, but we may see like a transitionary period where the state is going to be more socialist in like having to have things, because neoliberalism is consistently, there's been two protest movements over the last week. One like sort of like a final straw movement from students in Serbia. Actually, we should have done a story on this, but I guess we're talking about it now because some trains or like something collapsed on someone. I think in Greece it was
train
trains.
station roof collapsed.
Train station roof collapsed in Serbia. That's the one. And then in Greece they had like a memorial today because there was like a train derailment. Both of these things are as a result of neoliberal policies. So these like big infrastructure, this big infrastructure stuff is basically failing because neoliberalism keeps privatizing it, and the only way to save it, as like I think Graeber said, Sophie, everyone drink. And the only reason I know that Graeber said it is because Sophie told me that Graeber said it. Is that there'll have to be little socialisms over and over again in order to save this stuff. So it's
absolutely
situations.
Yeah, Graeber said that little communisms like create the conditions for capitalism to continue every day, and therefore like we're always doing the kind of altruistic things that keep society ticking over at all. And it's like I think the pandemic like exposed that lie for a lot of people, because we literally just had like essential workers classified, and just immediately everyone was like, oh, there's way way fewer people just like actually make society like make all of this like possible all the time, and everyone else is doing complete nonsense. And then and like people have characterized this as a depression, and I understand it. Like a lot of people societally have been like, what the fuck is the point? Because it was just shown to them that they were just doing absolutely fucking nothing. I don't know. Then I guess the point with decentralizing and like community owning all our tools for survival, but hopefully better than survival, is that like we're inside something decaying. That means we have to thrive as rot and thrive off of rot. Like we just have to take what resources exist in the imperial core as it's collapsing and turn them into systems that like structures that, you know, nourish our communities the best that we can. Like that's the only way we can do it.
Yeah. And I'd say too, like what we have definitely found with the work. So actually it's interesting because the method that the partnership I described earlier, that the age friendly stuff came out, we made other ones. It's called asset-based community development, right? So it's like a sort of UN World Health Organization approved approach, also called the strengths approach. And basically all the institutions claim to be doing it and none of them are. But the idea is it's basically they've sort of managed to turn anarchism, well, it's a bit different because I think they also have stakeholders in there, but it's really interesting. But you basically ask like, what are people already good at? What can we support? And what it normally comes down to, everyone knows this, right? Is it's like on a community level, you don't need a load of stuff, but people just need access to a couple £100 when a door breaks. Or do you know what I mean? Or they need like a big one that came out of that project was there's a huge area where the health outcomes, well, not a huge area, like, you know, a sort of half kilometer where the health outcomes were notably worse than the rest of Hume. This is over in St. George's, if you know it, Mule.
Yep.
And they were like, why is this? And what they found out eventually was that everyone was like, almost all the health services people were accessing in Hume, they were having to get a bus in and out of town. And it was like, well, why aren't the health services there? And it was because there wasn't a disabled toilet there, right? So there was a church that could have had a disabled toilet but didn't have the money or the skills to build one. And you've got the NHS, who definitely doesn't go around building disabled toilets in community buildings. But then just because they managed to get a partnership together, it was like, oh, this will just cost a couple of grand, which we've got in the fund, and an architecture student can do it for you in an afternoon. It's not complicated. So they built that toilet, you know, total cost a couple grand, and now they can have NHS clinics there and everything's ticking along again. But it's like, that's just the kind of stuff you know when you're in a context that the institution doesn't. And for me, actually, like this friction between that is the source of quite a lot of power. So like, you know, once you get a partnership up and running, it's really hard to do it. It takes a lot of work and you have to deal with everyone's trauma and a bunch of other stuff. But I think they're legitimately like some of the most exciting organizing structures because you can get like representatives from all the local community groups and the institutions around the table, and the cops love to show up and say nothing too, which always really makes me laugh. You know how they come in with their stab jackets on and they refuse to take them off, and you're like, but anyway, it's really funny. It's like you think someone in this meeting is going to stab you, do you? Like, is that what you think is going to happen? Anyway, I digress. But like, you've legitimately got a structure there that has more power representationally than the elected people who usually, like, you know, a few hundred people vote for. You know what I mean? But like, again, it's really hard getting people to see themselves that way. Like, especially in those age-friendly contexts. Like, oh, who are we to say this? And it's like, you represent a dozen community groups in the area. You're more representative than anything else here. You know what I mean? And I think it's the same with that work on the trans I mentioned. Like, we've not quite got there yet because, and this is the hardest thing we found too. Like this last year, everyone's struggling. It's been so hard and it's getting harder every year. And people are struggling to go at all. I think left, right, center, we see groups shutting down, venues shutting down. Like there's nowhere to meet, right? Like the last meeting I had was in Weatherspoons, and we're like, what are we doing in Weatherspoons? Having a meeting about keeping another community pub open. It's just wild. So I think it's really hard to get people to even think about this like network work. But I think fundamentally, politically, that people are just gonna have to, because that's like both the source of our power and the thing that like a system can never replace. There is no way that any institutional structure can ever replace. Here's 20 people in a room and we're all friends, right?
Yeah, it's always going to feel weird if they do that, because it'll feel weird in exactly the same way that when you go to, I mean, you all know this, Kim, like getting about Hume, obviously there is that like wonderful feeling and sense of community and like historical activism and community in Hume. It's all very obvious to see. But then if you go 10 minutes up the road to New Jackson, where they've just built all them massive size skyscrapers, it's like, you go to like the NHS hospital there, well, the NHS clinic there, and it's just like, it feels so odd. It feels so strange. It's like this is not community. This is a simulation. It's even like possibly a simulacra because it's so far removed from the initial sort of like idea of like a place that you go to get healthcare in your community. And of course the communities that they're building around it are fake as well. It's all sort of gentrifiers either knowingly or unknowingly from London or various other parts of the country.
This is like I called Mule, or no, I sent you a voice note earlier this week, and I was just like, I get my like my trans healthcare sorted through Trans Plus, which is like a pilot scheme for doing the GICs, but you skip the queue, and like so obviously it's for people in London, and like I think I was calling them up about 5 different things where I'd just been sort of told like this is happening, and I was like, okay, but when is any of that happening? And I called them up, and it was just the receptionist. Sorry, that's not to be belittling of like her job, but because as it turns out, she had an immense amount of power to get things done. Because like I called, and I was just like, I just want to know when this thing's happening, and she was like, oh yeah, that's booked now, and I was like, oh. Okay, so was it not happening and now it's happened? Okay, well anyway, I wanted to check about this thing. She was like, yeah, they're going to email you later today. And I was like, that seems like a strange coincidence that they were going to email me later today. Anyway, it's this thing as well. And she's just like, oh yeah, that's not actually booked, but yeah, now it is. Are you free this day? And it's like, and I was just like, all these things are suddenly happening because I've just like poked the bureaucratic system like the tiniest amount. And I was just like, there's something clearly wrong here in the way that we're like letting systems tell us what to do instead of us telling systems what to do. If like 3 separate doctors have told me that multiple things are happening and they're just not until I make one phone call. Like
I can bring this back to talking about the means of production actually now, which probably goes down well. So there's a book. So there's a someone called Ursula Franklin who's like the best tech writer no one's ever heard of, but yeah, she's a Canadian. She was like a nuclear physicist who refused to have anything to do with the nuclear industry. It was kind of wild in Canada in like 91, and she did this series of lectures called The Real World of Technology. They're amazing. You should listen to them. They're like, I don't know if people know the Royal Institution Christmas lectures. They're delivered in that tenor where they're so accessible and so well spoken and funny. But she defines there's a difference between a holistic technology and a prescriptive technology. So a holistic technology is, I think, sometimes what people think of first when they think of technology actually is like, if you're going to make pots with a bunch of other potters, I mean, maybe not everyone goes to gather the clay, maybe you get that in, but then in a workshop, everyone's like sculpting their own bits and running them and, painting them and putting them in the oven. And I'm not a potter, but you get the principle, right? You don't go into a community pottery studio and set up a production line. But it wouldn't be any fun. And I think the same with a lot of other things. So even like, I think an older version of a computer, when you had it on a desktop at home and it was on the internet, you could make a poster with it and print it off and put it up. So I think it's just this holistic thing where it's a tool for a person to use to complete a job. And the other side of that is a prescriptive technology, which is basically something made to a specification. So like a steel beam might be a prescriptive technology, or a certain size screw, or it might also be a network of computers where your boss can see how many words you've written every day, right? And I think this shift it's really, really powerful, but it's such a simple way of like understanding what's going on, because most of the computer jobs I think most people enjoy are the holistic ones, and the prescriptive stuff is basically the technology of the boss, right? So the reason we have a standardized steel beam is so the boss can work out how to maximize steel beam production. It's not to make anyone feel better about themselves, right?
Yeah.
And I found this really fascinating because like, especially I think it really started with Gmail in my mind. That was the first thing where all of a sudden, instead of having a piece of software I downloaded running on my computer doing a thing, it was like, oh, just log into this web browser and it's really easy. And, configuring your email is always a nightmare. So everyone was kind of glad to have it. But now bit by bit, this has happened with everything. So our whole world is now experienced through a web browser. But in terms of the means of production, this is where it's completely shifted, right? So you used to download software, have it on your computer, you do what you want with it, you control the process. But now it's like any software we access. If you think about something like Facebook, you your access is like a tiny little window into a giant corporate surveillance apparatus. And so I think it's something we hear over and over again when we've been doing the work is, oh, I'm not a tech person, but like I booked a flight this is when I came back from New York, and the woman in the travel agent was like on this like terminal emulator, like typing in commands to find out seat allocations, then telling me she wasn't very techy. It was like completely bonkers to watch. But everyone is on the computer all the time, and yet everyone thinks they're not a tech person. And I think it's just solely because means the production shifted, and it's done so silently and so carefully, and it's been done with all these concepts like the cloud, which just encourage you like not to think about whose computer it is or where it is or what runs on it or all these other things, right? So I think that's what's going with your reception, right?
It really seems like a commodity. Like the concept of the commodity is itself a prescriptive technology that like forces more prescriptive technologies downstream of itself, like turning like exchange into a process that's like carefully mediated, then forces us to, like you say, like then make a regulated steel beam, set up a production line, all of these things like flow downstream of the commodity, like, and its prescriptions.
And your example, right? So I think there was a previous time when receptionists were seen as a really vital piece of the infrastructure because they're the super smart heart of the operation that everything goes through. Are you crazy? Why would you not have one? And I think it says so much about how much tech devalues feminized labor too. This is also in Ursula Franklin's thing. Every technology requires massive amounts of feminized labor to prop it up. So like, but so in your example, right? And now it's just been decided that we don't want to have that fuss of like having a highly skilled receptionist. It's just all in the computer, but it still requires that. And I'm sure that's all she does all day, every day, right? Is she is just making up for the mess of the system.
Literally.
No input in designing.
But they can't trust it feels like look, I don't know their system, but like it feels like then they must not trust their doctors and nurses to have the power to make the appointment properly or follow through on the things that they say they're going to do, and they need to be like logged into the system as a work point that they need to follow up on at a later point or whatever like that. But no, exactly, the replacement of like feminized labor specifically, like I always think of like calculators. Like I don't know how many people know, like if I say calculator, you think of a pocket calculator and not of the job calculator that lots of women used to do, just doing small sums until it was replaced. Like, this is like so much of tech is like automating out women specifically.
Yeah. And like the role of secretary in unions, like I would die without our secretary. Like there is so much work that our secretary fucking does that is just so absolutely necessary, like handling all the GDPR stuff. In fact, this has given me a bit of a fucking like kick up the arse actually, because I was thinking about this recently that we should think about shifting some of the fucking secretary's responsibilities onto the chair, because it's like, well, why should the secretary be doing this much work? It's like a really like overworked role. Yeah, that's an absolutely great example. I was also thinking about the cloud stuff recently, because obviously, all these billionaires have shown their ass, and Mark Zuckerberg is like now wearing these like massive thick chains, trying to like look like he's really hard, and or I'll beat you up maybe.
He's got a podcast boy haircut now.
He's getting divorced. Yeah, he's getting divorced, isn't he? He's getting divorced.
Yeah, huge divorce energy.
And I was thinking about,
he's got that BDE, big divorce energy.
I was thinking about like, I want to get my photos off Facebook, and then I'm like, oh well, if I'm getting them off Facebook, where am I putting them? Because if you put them on Microsoft, it's like, oh, they're getting rid of support for Windows 11 or whatever, and you got to upgrade, you got to buy more stuff, and then like, who knows what the fucking user agreement is going to be with the new fucking operating system, and it's like, I am going to have to get Linux actually. That's the real like. That's the real conclusion. So no, it's
insane.
We have to decentralize that shit. We have to like,
Well, I think ideally we'd have community-run data centers, right? And I believe actually, like, there's a story last year that's inspiration on this. I think like some of the Maori people have built their own data center on inside the community buildings. So it's like you can go into the community center and it's like there's your data center. It's like actually amazing, and I think that's where I'd like to get to. So like, a version of this community technology partnership concept from an asset-based approach. It's just thinking about your community and thinking like, who are the people there? What are the skills? Like it's wild, again, it's wild and human because there's been this whole science part come and gone. It feels like mostly gone now. Oh my God, let's not get too distracted with that. I don't know if you know the UK fast story, but oh my God.
Yeah, UK fast and the it's Burley in it, or like New Burley or Old Burley. Yeah, and it's just fucking dead.
But I think the CEO went from being like the new Manchester wunderkind that Burnham was just having his photo taken with all the time to like prison for rape or something.
Yeah, that's right.
That
is
maybe
what happened. Yeah.
I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, no,
and now
he was
like
a real wrong
everything's dead, and I think they've gone out of business. And that's like Manchester in a nutshell, isn't it? We just have all these flash in the pans. But anyway, I think the point is there was quite a long while where I'm like literally in my community, and it was like, how can I go to Bright Building and have someone brag that we've got the fastest internet in the country and be surrounded by people in UK fast lanyards, but then you go to the African Caribbean Care Center and they can't, their computers aren't on the internet. Or like we did our launch event for PlaceCal in like the church up the road, and it was like between like 3 Cisco employees, 2 Microsoft employees, and like a £10 million project, they couldn't bring a Wi-Fi router to the event, and we had to get one. Right? It's just like, and I think again, it's really interesting to think about the real materiality of like, that whole like the future's here, but it's not evenly distributed. But that's true on like a hyper local level. Like actually, the resources everywhere are massive, but like you don't know where they are and they're not available to you. Because I think too, there's probably like 4 or 5 different like computer suites in the area, but like one of them's got a dust sheet thrown over it, and one of them's like in boxes, and one of them you get 20 minutes. I mean, the library's a lot better than it used to be. I remember when you used to just get half an hour and everyone had to like plan all their computing.
I remember that.
Yeah.
But again, it's just like, we're never really encouraged to come together as a community and go, what services do we need together? What are we commissioning? What do we want? And I think,
absolutely.
And like I say, there is a huge gap because, it's driving me a bit insane, but apparently the techie person answer to everything right now is Mastodon or the Fediverse. And it's just like, oh my God. Like, I think it's cool. I'm on Mastodon. I enjoy it. But it's like, apparently someone's done the maths and the answer is it's decentralized. Doesn't matter what, as long as it's decentralized.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated by this community center data storage thing you were talking about before. I just wanted to ask, like, Tim, do you know about this?
Yes, I was going to say something, but everything started moving on.
Please tell me.
Yeah, actually, a friend of mine, Amber, is heavily involved with that. She was part of the Te Mana Raronga, I think it is, Raronga. Yeah, which was like the Maori Indigenous data sovereignty sort of thing. They were like a little org that kind of got together and started doing it. And it was like kind of good because they managed to get a bunch of grants and funding and all this kind of stuff. And some of it wasn't just like government funding, it was like community funded sort of initiatives and stuff, and really kind of like lay the groundwork for stuff to be like self-sufficient and all this kind of stuff, as opposed to, we were talking earlier on about, getting on the leash of like, like foreign aid or like grants and things like that. But they've done a really good job of creating a self-sufficient organization that, they've so they started, where did they start? I can't remember exactly where they started, where the first one they set up was, but then they started hosting what we call wānanga, so like communal kind of learning things and stuff to teach other like hapu-led initiatives to kind of set up their own similar sort of things. I know that there's been a couple smaller kind of like little things pop up, but I think that in general, it's the kind of thing where there's a lot of people don't necessarily understand how it will benefit for them. Like, I think they see like, oh, okay, this could be a good idea, but we don't really have a use for it just yet. Or like, this is like, maybe we'll look at like starting up something like on a smaller scale or something like that. Whereas like, I think in the future, it's absolutely going to be something that they're going to be like, wow, why didn't we do this back then? But I think that is in Maori spaces, we tend to move pretty slow with stuff like this. There are a lot of people these days that are pushing like tech, being like, no, we need to get on this, But like, there's also like with that comes there's like people that will be pushing really great initiatives like this, but then there's also people that are like, we need to create a Maori Bitcoin, or like NFTs and shit like that. And then they just like hustle people. And then everyone collectively kind of like pushes back on that and goes like, oh no, we ran too fast. Like we need to like this stuff, like we don't know if we can trust like, stuff from this. So it is kind of like a slow moving relationship. A lot of, like I think, there's a lot of trusted figures in that industry. Most of them are actually involved with this movement. But just like with anything, there's always like people that kind of I guess take advantage of how little a lot of people know. There's always like I feel like there's always distrust with for Maori with putting anything too much of our stuff like out there, like like online or like and it's like I think that's part of it. Like there was a lot of stuff that the group were talking about around Indigenous data sovereignty, where they were like, okay, cool, well, we don't have to be giving our stuff to anyone else. Like this is what this means, this means that we're in control of our own thing. And because I think that the idea of like personal sovereignty is always like really important for Maori, and it's like I think that's why that initiative was particularly successful. But in general, I find that like it's kind of one of those things that it's like I can understand why people are slow moving. Well, I mean, I would say it's the people that have the power to fund a lot of these things are often slow moving, or to have the authority to have things set up, especially if it's like a hapu or iwi, like a tribal initiative. But it is cool to see, because there have been a couple of other things like this, also like in terms of like transformative justice initiatives that have been Maori led that we see pop up like overseas and stuff like that. And it's kind of like, oh, we actually can lead the way in some things, but it's just like managing to I guess like convince some kind of like like people that are like, I don't know, a little bit more resistant to change, which is like a good thing, like that's why a lot of our cultural stuff is like managed to, I guess, to survive, because people are quite traditionally minded and stuff. But
I mean, like resistance to change in the specific context of like Maori culture versus colonization is like one of the like exactly where we're talking about like everything getting scooped up by the internet and like stored into the cloud, and everyone's constant existence is just getting like monetized and commodified. Like it's exactly the place where I think like that instinct paid off in a way that like is rarer to see in other contexts. Like I was actually explaining to my girlfriend the other day about like how much difficulty like people had in even like specifically white people had in trying to learn Te Reo Maori because of a conservative attitude that's like, don't tell these people too much like that.
Yeah. It's like, well, like, so I mean the main thing with that is that the traditional way is to like learn face to face and all this kind of stuff like that, and there's like a lot of stuff that is like, it's not so much like it's this like secret information or whatever, but there is like kind of traditional practices around learning and all this kind of stuff. And so like there's a thing where it's like, if you have something and this is in New Zealand, and we go like, this is like this is like a Maori thing, and like we do it this way, then immediately someone comes along and goes like, well, that doesn't apply to me, or like, I can do this, I can do that. And that's like there's been huge things in the past that have like big ruptures that are caused by that. But with the tech stuff mainly, it's like I think there was an era where a lot of people were like recently that everyone was really keen to like get kind of amongst it and get online and explore these new pathways. And then there was just like a bunch of like absolute like snake oil merchants that just fleeced people by going like, like, oh, we got to have NFTs because NFTs relate to traditional practices and this way and that way. And just like saying like absolute bullshit. But like people that didn't know any better were like, oh, this is, yeah, no, we should do that. We should take all of our traditional artwork and carvings and make NFTs of it and then put it on the blockchain. And then
someone needs to come get their
and that's
nephew
gonna
urgently.
Somehow that's gonna protect our, that's gonna protect our grandchildren, or that's gonna like that's gonna kind of pay for some, just some shit like that. And it's like just ended up with all these people going broke, and like, it's just
I was going to say, I think you just tipped on a really key principle here, which is, I think, is it slow or is it careful? Because actually, like, one strategy the tech industry has to use is to constantly try and have the pace of process outpace the speed of learning. So like if you think the last few years we've had blockchain, AI, VR, and it all comes at a pace where, like, I don't think anyone really understands AI. I don't think we've even developed a good vocabulary around it, to be honest. I keep slipping. I want to start being more specific about, like, are we talking about OpenAI, the company? Are we talking about a specific LLM? Are we talking about a data center? Are we talking about... But it's like, that's so necessary, because if anyone really stopped to question it, they wouldn't be able to sell the stuff, right? So like, I think actually, like, slowing it down a bit so people can learn what's happening. And I think something, again, we say a lot in the work to, there's a lot of like roles around digital inclusion out there, and we keep out, and like, I think it goes over their head, but we have to keep telling them, look, digital exclusion is caused when you start using new things that are digitally exclusive. It's like, it doesn't come from anywhere. It's like you're demanding overnight that we all start using this tool that's really poorly understood. Like, exclusion's going to go up. And actually, like, the thing with digital exclusion is even that's been this weird sleight of hand where, like, in fact, it's like the example we gave earlier, Sophie. A lot of the time what happens is there's a face-to-face service and people decide it's too expensive, so they cut it and they make a shit web version that hardly works. And then if you can't access that, you're digitally excluded. And it's like, no, you've just been excluded. Just someone used a computer to do it with. You know what I mean? But it lets them do this like institutional bureaucracy where it's like, oh, that's IT's problem now, and not,
Speaking of digital exclusion, I wanted to ask, what do you think, how easy do you think it would be to create a system, or for orgs to basically get on a sort of level whereby the technology that they use is actually what belongs to them, and it's not going to be taken away by some kind of random update in the next month?
It's really hard. I think the metaphor I've used for this a lot, I'm calling it like the Burger King metaphor, right? It's like, imagine if you live in a little town and the only restaurants are like a Burger King and a McDonald's and a Subway and a KFC, and everyone eats like all their meals there. Obviously, everyone's really unhealthy. And then what we're doing is coming along and saying, oh, we're going to change the food culture. We want to have community restaurants and grow our own food and have a circular economy. But like, I think the distance between those poles is just absolutely astronomical. And actually, like, there's a level too where, like, we do live in a world where most people are just in that, like, passing rectangles of information around made by a computer, and they just want to come home and get on with it. And I think fundamentally it's hard because it's like a long-term thing to commit to, and it doesn't feel like a good time to do long-term things right now. It's like people have to start caring about the sovereignty, and I think it's starting now. But I think it's almost like, my friend was saying, 10 years ago, I think climate change stuff felt like this. It's like we all knew it was happening, but it didn't really feel like there was specific actionable things you could do. And I think this is basically what we're trying to explore. So I shared the link in the chat. I'll talk about it a little bit more. But this is basically the main reason we've relaunched as like a community, because we were always trying to do both and do client work and do funded work and do the community, and it didn't really make sense. So I don't quite know how I'm going to pay for it yet. We'll figure that out later. But basically what we realized is actually just like there aren't enough people even raising these issues in communities. So we're trying to launch this software, which it's not going to be as easy to use as something that Microsoft would. I mean, maybe Microsoft was a bad choice, because I think Teams is like the most loathed piece of software on the planet right now. But it's like, it is stuff we're going to have to build together, and we're going to have to build it in that way where there's patience for it not being great straight away, but the power of it being that we're all invested in its creation and we all own it together, right? It's like, building software takes a long time, and it's really complicated, and it's really hard to get funding for it. Lots of funders like won't touch it. And we found ourselves very frequently caught between, like, the community funders don't get the tech stuff, the tech funders don't get the community stuff. And it's very easy to turn it down. And I see why, because it is an industry full of snake oil salesmen and bullshit. So I think what I really realized is, we've got a little crew together now who are the people who've stuck around with us for a while. There's a list on the blog post I put, but we've got some people who work in tech. We've got some video people. We've got a comedian. We've got someone who's just doing some research into like all the different approaches people have used. And like I say, I just really want all of us to focus on, and me included in this, right? Just the doing. And in fact, I think Jamil's going to help out too, who's our friend, who's like doing a load of, he's just doing a load of video work for like local deportation campaigns. And it's the kind of stuff that's like just someone there in the space at the time who's like in the pub and the thing's happening and they're like, we'll make a video about it. Because that was like another project we started actually. There's this Tap House TV Dinners project, which is a community pub, which is sadly about to go bankrupt, I think, or has gone. It's very sad.
There is a sort of hesitant update about that, and it is possible that that might not happen. So yeah, you're right to be hesitant to say whether it is going to be, but like there's a fingers crossed thing that I'm not sure I can share publicly. But
I think
yeah.
I know some of it too. But
you
but
probably do.
They were like, when COVID started, they were like, well, we've got a kitchen. The Gaskell Garden Project were doing all this cleaning, all the unpicked vegetables. They had a load of volunteer drivers. And basically, it was just like the landlady Rach at the time, who's an amazing community activist. Anyone's met her, was just ringing around, going like, "Can we just deliver food for free to our neighbors? Because like, what else? Why else have we like set up a community pub if not this, right?" And basically, it was like just because I was there, I made them a thing in Airtable, which is like a sort of like it looks a bit like Excel, but it's like a database. But because it was COVID too, so we had to minimize contact time. But that was like a week work to set that up. But like if I wasn't there in that place, in that network with these people who all trusted each other, the project probably wouldn't have been able to work, because there'd have been no way to like triangulate that data between the requests and the cooks and the kitchen and the diets and the riders and everything else. So, but that's it. And then I think doing this too, and also I have to say, the thing I really underestimated doing like that trans dimension project is that trans people are just good at computers and everyone else is kind of shit. And now I've said it out loud, it seems like the most obvious thing in the world. But actually, like, I think there's a bit of an untold story here where a lot of trans people are also disabled. And a lot of us have spent a decent chunk of our life on the computer because it's the only place we felt safe. And a lot of
among
our
trans
activism is
people,
online.
there is an endemic vitamin D deficiency. Like it's something my GP told me, is that like she prescribed me vitamin D supplements, and I was like, I'm going to take these for a while, and the sun is going to roll around. I'm going to try and be in the sun as much as possible. But like it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Right. But I actually think it's a bit of a missing piece too, where like we do have all these skills, and because of a bunch of trans reasons, like most funders are really bad at funding trans stuff in general, I think. But if you do get funded, they'll fund like your trans housing project or your like health one, or it's very like it's stuff that's needed. But I think there's always been this specifically like trans and specifically trans femme like creativity around computers and building stuff that like should be more of the mainstream discourse around what activism is, right? I feel like it should almost be a bit cringe. Like if you're doing a big community project and there isn't like a trans person on the edge of it making the cool shit on the computer, what are you doing?
That's so true, actually. Yeah.
Like Ocean's 11 or whatever, when
right?
Whereas like everyone's got their like special, like all the crack team of people, and it's like you got your safe cracker, you got your your trans IT worker, you got, like.
No, I like that metaphor. I think that's what we need more of too, because it also can be a real struggle to get like, or leftist groups to even admit that they should spend effort on their graphic design and their website and stuff like that. I mean, I've sort of given up fighting a bit now, but it's like people sort of. I mean, I think actually Gen Z are a lot better at it. I've noticed it's got better over the last couple of years, but there was definitely a period where it was like that meme of like left-wing memes be like, and it's just like,
oh yeah, the dense
all the little tiny text squeezed into the box, and it's like, yeah. Oh, and again, like I keep saying, then yeah, it's inaccessible, poorly laid out, the graphic design's bad, it's in a cold building where you don't get fed and everyone's mad at each other. Why do we have capacity issues? Why does no one come?
Yeah, it's so funny, like surprisingly, I just thought, this is just an anecdote. It's not really related to anything. It is related to what we're talking about, but it's just sort of like interesting that like the basis of the conversation is we got to get off clouds. We got to make sure that we're, independent when it comes to technology. I actually know an organization. I'm not going to name it because I don't want to expose any weakness or flaw in their system. But basically, one of their like paid staff who like created the website hosted it, and well, I think, as far as I know, still hosts it entirely on their computer. And they actually had these like huge fears of like, well, if I go out and get hit by a fucking bus tomorrow, like no one can ever change the website, and that's it. It's over, and the website's gone. Like you just can't do anything with it. So like wanted to actually like change it to a WordPress website to quell that fear. So anyway, I just thought, yeah,
It's
it is an interesting one. It's like there are these different like I guess fears and potential fuck ups that we have to think about. But yeah.
It's literally the bus factor, like the measurement of like if you're how many people getting hit by a bus can your team survive is like an organizational
bus proof
thing. Yeah.
I think that's okay too. I think like I said before, I think most organizations are quite dependent, and actually, like, I think the big piece here that I think basically what tech's given the left that I don't think we've really like worked out how to do properly is I really feel like we need more smaller organizations that do more really focused things. I'm getting really against like these organizations that just grow and grow in size. And then it's like I say, because my focus right now is so on spending more time doing and less time talking about doing, I think I'm really realizing how it's like, and I think also we just need to build up the trust relationship between all the different things. So I think there's groups like the Neon Spokesperson Network that I think is amazing because they basically just went, we need more left-wing voices in the news. But if we're going to do that, what infrastructure do we have to have so that we can do that? Like, you know what I mean? Like we're going to have a big list and we'll ring around and we'll be proactive about making that happen. I think that's obviously quite a big example. And so I suppose that's where we're trying to go with tech a little bit, right? We're trying to be a bit of a like, if you're a techie person, if you want to help out with some code, if you want to make a thing, if you want to do a bit of design, come and join our Discord. Or, I think we're going to work on other spaces, but Discord's so annoyingly good. It just sits at exactly the right spot of being like just open enough people join it, but just closed enough that you can get stuff done. And then I think too, we've got this little network of other tech groups we've been working with. So there's like Common Knowledge in London and Autonomic who do infrastructure hosting. There's a little studio called Dutalica in Scotland. Tipping Point, who are like a climate justice organization, do a lot of really cool tech stuff too and have supported us. There's another project called Resilience Web that's a bit like helps groups list around circular economy ideas. And at the moment, basically all of us are operating in parallel, and we have been because of capitalism. We're each other's competition. And then we found out a few times like, oh look, we're all having to compete for the same little bits of work that are out there. And actually and it's like I'm saying, I think really what my job is with this new organization is just to sort of get people to value tech more and to value the things that I think that sovereignty word is really interesting actually, because I think it can be it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think most of the time I hear sovereign in England, it's like a bad thing. And I think that idea of community sovereignty of their own data is really interesting. And I think we just have to build up the number of people doing this kind of work, you know what I mean? And even little stuff like, when I was doing resistance lab work, if I was doing that again, I think I would have been thinking a lot more about like reaching out to other groups like Copwatch stuff and asking them if they need help, like dealing with the use of force data, which we spent a lot of time like breaking down and analyzing. And I've not even looked at that data in a few years, but I mean, partly that was because Manchester's cops lost all the data, which was like,
oh, they lost it. Interesting.
Oops.
Yeah, they love to do that.
yeah.
Oopsie. But and in fact, I did speak to someone from the Windrush campaign, and that was a case of I was just helping her find some of the data, and it's all on the government website. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, it's like I say, fundamentally at the root of all of it, what tech is really good is automating like the messy bits you don't want to do. But it takes a bit of setup. So that's the reason why we've really struggled to roll out PlaceCal, because it's like finding that community organized person who has the time and the space and the energy to like actually like sort of map out a network in a way that's got some resilience for a longer run. Like no one's got the headspace right now. So, we found funding for it to pay people here and there, but like I would love to make like a Manchester activism calendar that's all automatic and everything updates, but it's just like, I think my version of going slow is finding the right person to run that, right? Because it should probably be an org that already exists with someone who's already doing that kind of work where Alto will help, and then we sit down and make it all happen somehow. So I think like, again, because tech's got that magic one thing, it's so easy to look at the product and go, oh yeah, I can see how that would fix it. And then it's like, yeah, but are you the right person? Is this the right place? Is this the right time? Like all those very, very boring questions.
Yeah, for sure. So that is, obviously, like, really, really fantastic stuff, Kim. And, it's definitely something that I agree with as someone who's done organising for the last 3 years. It is so, so important to, like, actually, like, figure out, it's the process, right? Like, you started at the start of the show, at the start of the episode, you said, we don't enough talk about the process. We don't enough talk about, like, how do we get to this stage? It's like, oh, it's just like a guy in his room a lot of the time, like you say, like running a social media thing and then running around all over town and stuff. And that's like great. It's great that people are doing stuff, but it's like we need to recruit more activists. We need to get more people who are willing to actually do stuff. Do you see like a way that tech can influence that in any way?
So I suppose what I'm really resting my laurels on is this community technology partnership approach, right? It's actually funny because we did a journal paper about it in 2020 because a lot of the funding for this came from the uni first, and my friend who's my now good friend who lives down the road who I've also radicalized. I mean, he was open to it, you know what I mean? But he's an anarchist too now, I think. But we did a paper on it where it laid it out quite formally, and we've done these big projects. But again, the thing is, when you're running a studio, you don't really have time to write out what you're doing. It's very weird. Like, you can see there's a point if I was going back through our blog archives, and it's like it started out more theory opinion pieces, then all of a sudden it's like a portfolio, and then it's a mix, and it's like, so I think for me this is it. I think we've really got to like raise an interest in this way of doing things, right? Because I know loads of people too who would love to do a thing, but like I was saying earlier, like, what are the kind of entry choices for activism at the moment? It's like, oh, what rainy street corner do you want to go on? Or what Zoom call do you want to go on? And I think for loads of people, and not just for the obvious reasons, but also like people with kids, people who are carers or disabled or just don't have time. And there's so many people out there who I think would just love to like design a poster or like, which isn't a simple thing, I should say. The word just is a bit of a red flag. Or in fact, one of the biggest untapped barriers to action is actually mother and child groups. So like we found doing this process and hear there's stories of like the amount of communities where there's one mom who's just taken it upon herself to maintain the giant Google spreadsheet of all the groups that you can go to. And then like, eventually the kids grow up and the whole thing falls apart and then no one else does it. So they're the kind of people we're trying to work with, right? And there's so many of these examples. There's so many people who are trying to do these like big network projects. Like Music Venues Trust would be one from a wildly different area, right? Where they've identified a shared interest and they're trying to build a network. And I think I think that's where this can really come into its own, but it has to start from this weird place right now in a time where all our resources have been stripped. It's like, how do we even find the time and the energy to start building these new things? And I think the answer is it's got to be small, it's got to be real, it's got to be day to day, it's got to be things like Tap House TV dinners where it's like, it takes someone a few days or a week and they can, but finding out what those things are, that's about trust and relationships and everything else, which are things that like don't really get talked about in tech. There's always this idea that your universe is the audience for everything online is everybody in the world, right? Which kind of means it's for nobody. So this is where I'm trying to frame it right now. I'm trying to like frame this discussion around like, we don't really have, it's like communism's a verb, right? We only get there by talking about it until we figure it out. And I'm very much at the point now where it's like, I think there needs to be more people doing this work. And to do that, we have to make it exciting and fun and cool. And we have to give people other ways of getting involved in stuff that are like rewarding and make us feel good and give us time to like get together and build stuff again in spaces like we used to, right? Before it just all got into arguing online. We used to, believe it or not, just go into real spaces and do shit, and then we had the arguments there instead. You know what I mean?
Spot on, yeah. I mean,
that's real.
It's the entire modus operandi of our show. I'm sure you've realized in like checking out a couple of the episodes over the last couple of weeks. Like, yeah, we're big on get off social media, get into the real world kind of thing. Obviously, personal circumstances allowing, we understand that not everybody can do that as easy as other people. So yeah, like super important, like just to talk about like how we actually get there, like how we actually do that. And yeah, I think that this particularly is such like a, I guess, like you said, we've just not been discussing it for long enough. So it's like, even the people who can do the tech are sort of sat there like, well, shit, I don't know where we would even begin. Like how, ideally, like in my head, like I've got no idea how any of this stuff works. Like I wouldn't say I'm not a techie person because I am, Like, as per your thing before, like, yeah, I use computers all the fucking time. But generally, if it comes to like coding or something, I've not got a fucking Scooby Doo. And I imagine it's like the way that it has to begin is on decentralized work around operating systems, right? If we have like a group of workers who are essentially unionized, but unionized in a way that like the company that owns the operating system is a co-op or something of that nature, and therefore it's like something that you can rely on, and like if you can become a member of it easily, and therefore you have a democratic voice if you think that something's going to go wrong. Like, who amongst us thinks that they have the power to challenge the fact that Microsoft has been supplying the Israeli genocide in Palestine for the last few years? Like, you simply would have to do direct action stuff, and that's like a lot harder than just like going, hey Bill, I don't think we should do this, man, and then like get a bunch of your worker friends to be like, yeah, we could actually probably change this. So like I imagine it's something that starts like in that regard, and then it's a case of building software that is in line with that model and is in line with that sort of cooperative mindset kind of thing. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I suppose actually the most important starting point, I think you just like talked around it, actually, is we just start valuing it. And that's the thing where it's like actually doing websites. And part of the reason why I start doing them client work too is they're actually pretty thankless things to make. It's the kind of thing that you only success is usually judged by the absence of people moaning about things. It's not hugely rewarding, but I think that's fundamentally because most people don't actually want to have a website. It's just a thing they think they have to have. So it's like an annoyance that costs time and money and people. But I mean, just an immediate thing. It might make sense now. I probably like bleat at you when we were about 4 pints deep about using this tool we've made for the tenants union. And maybe it might make a bit of sense now, because really what we will be doing in that, just to give a really grounded example, right, is like you've already got a sort of branch structure. It would be going and just like saying to each local branch, like, okay, what are you using? What events do you have? Can we help you publish them? And then we can bring them all together in PlayScale. And then you've got the central tenants union calendar that has all the Manchester events on, that's automatically updated, right? Like that's the thing we could do.
Yeah, spot on.
But I think knowing what that thing is that we're valuing, and I think it's hard too, because you can get really bogged down in it, where when you start asking, we're not encouraged to think long term, right? So when you start asking, like, what are we actually doing here? What's the strategy past like the next 3 months? It can be really hard. And I think also on the left, we've just, for good reason, we've all got really reactionary. It's like bad thing happened, we must counter bad thing. Bad thing happened, we must counter bad thing. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but that's not going very well for us. So again, I think it comes back to that like slowing down a bit sometimes, where it's like, and it's stressful too. And I think that's what burns people out, because you just have the feeling of constantly losing. And I think those more long-term things that, and I think especially if they can create independent employment for people, like you were saying, right? It's like a different, I don't know. Like I say, we're not really finished all these thoughts, but I'm, it's good to be on here and draw your thoughts in and ask how we can start doing this work. Because I think like the benefits are unclear now too, right? That will be the other thing. Like I think with those data centers, the benefits now are unclear. But I bet if you fast forward 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden it will be like, holy shit, wasn't it great that we had this when, the third AI computer outage happened or whatever. I mean, and like, and I think it's like, starting any local gardening project now, for example, feels like, oh my God, how long is that going to take? But when we get into the second climate war, we'll be glad we did, right?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. No, yeah, and yeah, you'll be pleased to know that the GMTU staff admin actually already collates all the branch activities. So all that she'd have to do would be like, here they are. And it would be very easy to like set that up.
That might be a job we can help automate for them, right? And then they have some time to do to rest or have fun or have a pint.
Exactly.
I was about to say do something else, but I'm like, no.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're definitely a bit over the time that we should have started asking questions, so that's fine. But we do have like quite a few questions. So I don't know, Sophie, do you want to ask the first one?
Absolutely. Let's get into the Q&A. The first question is from Rohak. The question is, what do you think about the increase in popularity of platforms like RedNote outside of Western control? The cultural exchange alone has been worth it, as well as breaking the brains of liberals when exposed to the results of socialist policies.
I think it's pretty funny, is my main thing with RedNote. I think the funny thing was The funny thing that's happening at the moment is I think like a lot of people it's sort of like who's part of the best empire, isn't it? It's like I think people, especially in the West, are under some illusion, or America especially, are under some illusion that like their autocracy is like better than everyone else's or something. So it's just very peculiar, and I think that's becoming really obvious now, where it's like actually no, they're all enormous global empires. They're all awful. Like we're all just people trying to get on with living our lives.
I
So I
think
think
that
like,
one of
and
the funniest things has not been just Americans learning how much better they could have it, but there was people I saw who were talking about like telling Chinese people they were chatting with about like COINTELPRO and
Oh yeah.
they were like, I'm just confirming for these people I'm chatting with that America is like worse than they thought.
did you see
Yeah,
that
yeah.
post that was someone saying, "Is it true that you have to pay for an ambulance, or is that Chinese propaganda?"
Yeah, yeah. So the one about there was a guy that was like, I don't know, hitting them up about that whole like the social credit score myth, and then learning that he actually has a credit score that he has to worry about in America. Like he had no idea that, like, oh wow, what a credit score is or whatever like that. And yeah, wasn't a great time for him, it seemed.
But yeah, so I think fundamentally that's why it's funny, right? It's just like another country's giant tech thing. And I think,
Yeah.
our main thing is choice. And I think it's funny. I think I'm very a no ethical consumption to capitalism also applies to tech, I
Mm.
think. So like I think it's funny.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, so we got another one here from Just Johnny. Would it be better to give false information to these corporations that that surveil us, or is it better not to use them at all and let them starve? Mm,
I think fundamentally my perspective nowadays is just try and live your life in the way that makes you happiest, right? It's like
yeah,
I think the choices our individual choices are not really here or there. I think if
yeah,
I'm actually starting to already see it a bit with AI discourse. Like I know it uses tons of water, but I really don't want to get us into like carbon footprint mode again. It's like
mm,
this is global capitalism. You have to use it to get your job. We're replacing it, not, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I don't know. I think it's just like you do you, and again, I think that a lot of the open source movement wants to make people feel guilty about not using open source, and I'm just like, there's there's
yeah.
there's more important issues out there, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I think another thing as well when we think about this is giving false information to corporations is like that's the information that we choose to give them that they ask us to relinquish as opposed to like the metadata that they are just like constantly collecting anyway. So it's like doesn't necessarily, it doesn't matter to them if my name is Timothy or like fucking Big Dog 69 or whatever like that. They're still collecting all this metadata in the background that is like that is like just as useful to them and just as valuable. So yeah,
The thing
it's
that gets me nowadays too is everyone just being like, "Oh, can you get your email?" That's everywhere now, right? And I'm just like,
yeah.
no.
I had it to use Wi-Fi in a pub the other day. I was just like,
Mm.
there's no signal in this pub. Oh, they have Wi-Fi. And then they were asking me all these questions. I was like, I'm just trying to connect to the Wi-Fi. You cannot be serious.
It's not a hill I'm willing to die on, but I don't think they should be allowed to call it free if it requires handing over your data.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, you're right.
No,
true,
I
yeah.
agree.
Spot on.
Mm.
Okay, so next up, we've got Jenny Azoth, who says prescriptive technologies seem pretty straightforward by definition, but what are some examples of holistic technologies that are exemplary of their type? Like, would a holistic technology be something that perfectly adapts to any given task, or are we talking are we talking more no unitaskers with this one?
I think it's just anything that works for you, right? So I don't know. I think crafting is like the ultimate example, right? Like people who can make their own clothes or knit or do the other thing. It's like you control the whole process, and that's something that like will outlast any given piece of technology. Um, yeah, I think of other examples of it, and I think it's also like the point of holistic technologies is often just that it's enjoyable and that it's fun, right? Which is another thing AI is trying to take away from us. Like it's nice to paint a picture, you know?
Yeah.
It's fun and good. It's fun and
Yeah,
good to do
absolutely.
art. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if that's it, then the next question is from Just Johnny again. And the question is, I suppose a good question for folks. Well, the question is, what would be your recommended Linux distros for newbies and slightly more confident people?
Oh my God, I'm gonna get cancelled. No, I'm not going to say it. I recommended Linux distro for newbies is Mac OS. I'm sorry. I don't know. I've not used Linux for a while because honestly, I just wanted a computer that worked. I'm so going to get banned from my own Discord if anyone's listening to this. I used to go with Ubuntu. That's really good. I do use it along in I use it a lot in like development contexts. But yeah, I think the operating system is something I would normally change quite late in thinking about adapting stuff. I think there's a lot more practical stuff you can do that's less like invasive, like installing Signal, for example, which is something I think everyone should do and use it instead of WhatsApp. Again, it's a great example because I think it's probably a tiny bit worse than WhatsApp technically, but then you're starting to opt out of that like meta, the meta network of everything else. I think using browsers like Firefox, switching over to open source tools, like I think that's good. And yeah, because don't get me wrong, like Linux is really cool, and like I would use it again if I wasn't also doing like video and graphics and stuff. But yeah, I think it just comes back to my like do what works for you. I suppose the other thing you can do if you just want to test it out is get something like a Raspberry Pi and put it on that and just muck about with it. That's a fun thing to do. But yeah,
I have an uninformed endorsement of Fedora because I think that's the one that my girlfriend has installed on one of our PCs. Like we have an old PC that we use mostly as a TV, and like I like Fedora on that, but I don't know the different distros. So like people take that for what it's worth. Like I have that.
I think people like Arch maybe, but yeah, it tends to get personal preference. But yeah, it's definitely like, it's like heavy metal subgenres or the fracturing of the left. It's like there's so many of them. And that's what makes it great. But yeah.
She's messaged me to tell me that it's Debian, not Fedora.
Debian, right. I was going to say, Fedora's kind of a corporate-y one. It's based on, there's a company called Red Hat who do one of the big ones, and I think it's meant to be a joke about hats. But yeah, Debian's like a more old school one. It's actually quite sweet because the guy who invented it is called Deb, and his girlfriend's, no, the guy who invented it is called Ian, and his girlfriend was called Deb, so they just called it Debian.
Oh, that's nice.
Thank you, Debian.
Aww.
Okay, well, Jenny Azoff has asked again, speaking of trans IT work and disability, is there any way we can help remotely?
Yes, join our Discord. So I suppose this is where we're getting to. So I put a blog post in the chat earlier. It's probably lost a bit in the scroll back. So currently our gfse.studio site is very much this like the thing I was talking about earlier. There's a holy mix of like studio and think pieces and community work, and now our new one's going to be this gfsc.community domain name, and we've not fully launched yet. We'll be doing that. We need to get a blog theme done. I just wanted to have it live for this because I thought it was mad to come and not talk about it. But yeah, we're going to try and run it on a bit of a Patreon model, like if people want to support us, they can. But yeah, most of our work happens on our Discord, which I know isn't for everyone, but we've really struggled. We've got an email list server too, but it is really hard. I think at some point you just have to sort of pick a central place. There's a couple active projects we've been working on. So yeah, come and join and say hi. But again, we're really trying to make the main thrust of that just being a nice place to be. So just come hang out too. You don't have to do a thing if you join.
So it's gfsc.community, people listening.
Yeah.
Yes.
The next question is from Sho Chanir, I think that's how you say it. Discord, as far as I understand, Zulip is something similar that's reasonably workable, a usable alternative, although I've not actually used it or talked to people about how one hosts it. I did think this was a question, so I'm sorry if it wasn't, but it sounded like one. Anyway, I was wondering if you had any insights on that anyway.
I think, again, this is in the category of like, yes, there's lots of things that no one uses. So I think people are on Discord, they have Discord accounts, so we use Discord. It's the same reason why everyone ends up on WhatsApp, right? Like everyone's just on WhatsApp, so you end up using WhatsApp. I mean, I'm actually, to be honest, I'm mostly glad we're over the age of people saying, let's set up a Slack server. They were dark times. I feel like we're past that now. So, but again, I think the only way that we're going to ever get off these corporate platforms, because it's just, you can't compete, right? The amount of investment they have in the business model and everything else, but it is going to be in this community context, and it's going to have to be like communities deciding what they value. But right now I feel like they're so far apart. We've got this open source discourse, and it's all like software for like, the sort of 0.1% techiest people in the world to use, which is great for them, but it's not like it's not remotely accessible to anyone else. And it's also weird because I spent a lot of time in that thinking that I was one of the good ones and I understood my position, and then I found I absolutely did not, and I was still several major steps over from where everyone else is. And then honestly, I think everyone's experience watching other people use the computer, right? But I think it's just like there is some cool stuff there, but like I think practically it's kind of unusable now. And the question we have to ask is what's it for? And this is really the problem too at the moment, where most of the big open source stuff that people are using, like Mastodon, which not even that many people are using, but they've just copied Twitter, which is fine. But it's like this master's tools won't dismantle the master's house thing, right? Where like I'm on it, I love it, but like I am questioning why I need to have a tiny little box to type my takes into. Like,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
why is that a thing I
takes.
feel I need in my life? Like,
Endless takes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think about that a lot, like the format of like, you know, like a social media site or app or whatever, and what kind of behavior that encourages, you know, like, yeah, like the take machine, like the little box that we put our takes in, or like, you know, like Instagram, how it like fucks with everyone's mental health and all that kind of stuff.
right.
But
Yeah, and there's like Pixel Fed now, but it's like, okay, so I can be on Instagram that none of my friends are on and also have my photo in a little square. And maybe I join it. Like, I'm really not knocking it. I think it's all great and we should try it, but there's definitely a missing part of the discussion here, right? And I think, in fact,
absolutely.
I think the more meaningful conversation about this has actually been with X, right? Where X, or Twitter, I don't know what we want to call it, Twix,
Whatever.
is like, it had sort of become the official place that organizations were using to announce what they're doing, which gave it this air of credibility.
People
right?
used to take it seriously. It used to
Then
be
all
a
of a
real
sudden,
website.
they were making it so you couldn't see threads if you were logged out. So it actually went from being somewhere organizations could broadcast. They took away a really key feature. But I doubt any organization had a concept why they joined Twitter. And now people are leaving it for ethical reasons, which is fine. And I should probably delete our account too, but get around to it at some point. But it's just really interesting, isn't it? How like there's never a concept like, what are we on this? What functions is it doing from us? Because we're sold the product, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Man, I still remember for people using bulletin boards and like IRC and shit like that, but so long ago. Well, so we got another one here from Dom. What are your thoughts on the online doom spiral, i.e., when folks get into bad news, get a dopamine hit for commiserating, and end up just miserable and depressed all the time? I'm interested in what you think can be done to get my fellow organizers out of this pit every time horrid things happen in the world.
Yeah, I am fair to this. I am a doom scroller. I can't stop touching my fucking phone. It's too well engineered. I'm so mad at it. It's like, because like I think just as in context too, right? Like they Silicon Valley hires people who design, like psychologists who design fruit machines to make all the interfaces as addictive as possible, right?
Yeah.
And it goes down to these really subtle things, like on Instagram. You know how like sometimes you'll load it and there'll be a thing and it'll like scroll up and you can't find it again. Apparently that's deliberate because it makes you panic and always want to press an action so you save it. So it's real, but I think a lot about, there's a bit in Foucault's Introduction to Oedipus where he lays out his rules for living an anti-fascist life, and one of them is literally just do not think that one has to be sad to be militant, even if the thing one is fighting is abominable. And I think about this like every day because I think again it's this reactionary thing, and I think like there's so much trauma and activism and organizing, right? Like we're all generally into it. We've got our own origin stories of what got us into it. And I think there's just a lot of traumatized people bouncing around and setting each other off. And actually, it's really easy just to like be upset and make that your personality and do all of it. And I think it can take quite a lot to try and take a step back from that and go, who is this serving? What is it achieving?
Yeah, we need people who are like living lives worth living offline, who are like happy and satisfied, who are like putting their time into the revolution where it actually helps, and then not just making themselves miserable.
The personality hires. Yeah.
And
that's what we need in our Ocean's 11 revolutionary team. The trans IT worker, the personality hire.
I think a lot of orgs, this is going to be I feel like this is a bit NGO cringe, but I feel like a lot of orgs just don't have a theory of change either, which is like, I think this can really happen too when stuff gets a bit cliquey and everyone's kind of mates and you're showing up mostly because it's your mates rather than it's change, which again, I think that's a good place to do activism from, friendship.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is if you can't like really distill down what you're doing into like preferably one thing, right? Then how is anyone else ever going to find you and share you? How are you ever going to make connections outside of that? So like I just made a decision a while ago as an as an anarchist that what that means for me is I'm just going to work with all of the people working on the shit I care about. So, I'm making friends with Lib Dems and Labour and Green because I think they have something to add actually. And I don't think I would have said that 5 years ago. I think I was a bit more,
Well, it
I
has to
think
be
a bit more of a dickhead 5 years ago.
it has to be a broad front, doesn't it? Like that's
Right.
like we always quote the ZAD on this show because the ZAD is such a great example of going up against some of the most violent state repression in the imperial core. Just the caveat there, and winning. And the way that they did that was with a broad front. Like you had historic dairy farmers sat next to vegans, like, anti-species vegans and, counselors and shit like that at the the councils that they created essentially in order to actually like win and organize together. And it's so important to remember that it's like, yeah, we have to unify and understand like what is the purpose here. And it's what you're talking about in people being traumatized and basically making that their personality. It's movement killing behavior, right? Like a movement killing behavior is when you individualize something so much that like actually everything in the organization has to be about how it makes me feel and not about whether we're actually doing anything. And it's that's absolutely something we got to get away with.
There's that quote, isn't there? Is it D'Andy Primo, the one that's like, there is no one way, it takes all of us pushing at it from all sides to make a change. And I always feel like in leftist space there's a little asterisk and it's like, but not that way. You know what I mean?
Okay, so next question is from Han. And she says, how much should we worry about encrypted data breaching in the context of organizing, asking after arrests of comrades in the past year and messages being used as evidence?
I think there's two things there, right? One of them is, do your organizing on Signal, put disappearing messages on, talk to everyone on Signal. I'm going to try and pressure my friends to do that more. Because I think, most tragically, like the Manchester 10 case, which I assume your viewers probably know about, that was just one of those ones where, the group, I should go from the top, right? Group of black kids who basically all got sent to prison on a joint enterprise case. And almost all the evidence was based on the Telegram group chat they were in together and some like music videos they'd been in together. And it was used to show association where, I think one of the cases just got thrown out. I think I'm a little bit behind on the news. But it was just like, if they were on Signal disappearing messages, that data wouldn't have existed. And what it meant was that actually, like, the prosecution were able to build up a case based on not who they were as people, but like who their representation of themselves was on their phone. And I don't know if anyone else remembers being, 15, but like, I mean, it's just two different things, isn't it? So it's kind of wild. But then I think in terms of breaking the encryption itself, because I know like with quantum computing, that's a thing. I really don't know. I think if that happens, there'll be bigger fish to fry because all of a sudden, all the information in the world is kind of like is up for grabs. And I don't really know what would happen in that case. I mean, it's also, there's a possibility that a lot of this has already been broken by state security agencies.
Well, that is what Han is clarifying.
Announce that they've cracked it in order to prosecute anyone. And I think if you're going on marches, then you're pretty far down the priority list. I think they're going to save that shit for international espionage.
Yeah, well, Han has actually clarified in the chat that the comrades who've had this used against them were on Signal and using disappearing messages.
Oh, shit.
I think that's the actual like implication of the message there. So I guess based on what you just said, maybe there might be some kind of legal precedent to be like, you have to announce that you're doing this. I don't know.
I don't know why. I mean, without knowing more context, I would say too, I mean, I left low them actually, because there are a lot of, I don't know anything about your situation, but I have been in a lot of Signal group chats in my time that have like 100 people in and no one's moderating it. Yeah. And like, the only time, I was affected sort of middling affected by the undercover cops in Leeds that came out, like, woman called Lynn Watson who realized that she could actually massively fuck up a community center by just dealing with the till and the admin. It was so funny at the time. It was so frustrating. And then you look back and you're just like, the amount of times 20 quid went missing and there was an argument or a row or someone fell out or like something didn't go in the diary. And now it's like, that was all just sabotage, wasn't it? And she was getting paid to do that. But I think I remember at the time around that, everyone was sat around and they were like so convinced that like, they were using like laser microphones or like there's some secret listening going on and everyone was taking their SIM cards out the phone. And then you find out afterwards, like, no, it was just Mark Stone, and the way he infiltrated the scene was just, to show up with a vanity, like anyone want a lift, and it's just like, oh my god. So I think it's just a little bit. Again, I don't know your specific situation, obviously, but like,
your
I would
infosec
imagine
and
if your
OPSEC
encryption is being broken, there's something else going on. Personally,
like
hacking even done by the state is not, like I'm downloading the mainframe. Like it's turning a system upside down and shaking it and see what falls out. Like it's just any kind of vulnerability that can possibly be. So it's not necessarily a vulnerability in Signal and its encryption and whatever.
I would love to know more though, because I could just be ignorant here, but that's my gut feeling. Is just like, yeah.
Cool. Last question is from Jem, who says, do you know of anyone working on a better idea for a thing like Matrix Protocol, either for security, example, not leaking metadata, or for building community social nets?
I don't. So I suppose my take, again, coming back to this community technology party concept, party, sound like getting tired now, community technology partnership concept, is probably the tech's fine or like workable, but what's missing is like the organizations that are willing to deploy it for the benefit of their community. So even now, right, there are things like Nextcloud that I think are actually a pretty good G Suite alternative that we should look into. But like, you got to find I don't know how simple it is to just get a Nextcloud account. And then obviously all the other questions pop up, like, is anyone going to receive my emails? Is like calendar invitations going to wait, and you've got to decide if you have the capacity to figure all that stuff out. So I think that's it for me. I think like we have so many technologies, we're almost overwhelmed with them. And really the goal is to like, if you think of something like riseup.net, I think that's also a little bit the model we've kind of copied a little bit, where it's like RiseUp they just do email lists and email for activists, right? But I think we should have more organizations like RiseUp. We should just have loads of them, right? I'm very pluralistic with my politics now. It's like, I think we should have tens of thousands of tiny organizations, because the empire genuinely can't do anything about that. But what they can do things about is like a few, and the cops say this, don't they? They're like, we can deal with one protest with 10,000 people, but we can't deal with 1,000 protests with 10 people, right?
Yeah. Well, we are also constantly saying, like, if you are out there and you have a group of friends and you know some organizers and you want to make a show like Red Planet, you absolutely should. Because the idea of a unique selling point of a product, like, or making a show as a product, is inherently capitalist. And actually, we shouldn't be afraid of replicating what other people are doing, especially if it's effective.
Like a great example is Palestine Action, like small groups of activists that are like, like literally just like shutting down factories and stuff, like only, a couple of them at a time involved with these actions. And just like, like you don't need 10,000 people marching in the streets if, sometimes, 10 people is enough for whatever, you set out to do. So, just something to think about.
Yeah. And I think that, and we were inspired by that. I think that's part of the reason we started doing our own publishing too, right? And I think because also the presence of other things helps you find your own focus. I think that's another really key thing too. I think especially in capitalism, we're so used to seeing each other as competition. And actually, like, I've had to do quite a lot of work to get over this, right? Like working with the studios, they are our competition because it's capitalism. But really, we have to find ways to go, like, what are you doing? That's really cool. But if I do this thing here, so hopefully if we do this program, and I think a lot of the content we'll probably want to make is like how to set up a stream, how to do a recording, and we want to do stuff that feels like you can follow it and it not just be like, oh no, those are the experts over there. Because when, I'm expert in something, but I don't know what it is. And you're the expert in something too,
Well, I think that's the end of the time that we have today. Kim, you've been a fantastic guest. We do like to thank you for coming on. We do like to ask our guests if they have any homework that the viewers could take part in if they want to take next steps related to the topic we've been discussing. So even if it's just join your Discord, if you think that's something everyone should do.
I think it's got to be install Signal, right? Probably the easiest meta product to do without, but it requires people to join it. So maybe install Signal, join the Discord, and if you like our blog, you can subscribe to the newsletter and maybe even give us some money too if you want, but you don't have to.
All right, reminder of your website?
gfsc.community. But like I say, it's a work in progress. It will be I think I'm going on holiday next week, and when I come back, it will start to
Okay, cool,
accelerate.
cool.
Nice.
All right, well, have a lovely holiday. Thanks for
Thank
coming
you.
on, and have a good night. Bye.
Thanks so much, Kim.
Bye.
Okay, well, with that said, the only thing to do now is to remind everyone once again that that Red Planet is a show made possible by our supporters over at patreon.com/red_planet. We need your support. It's a tough time for everyone, but we have, lost support and would like to be able to keep on doing the show and be able to expand more. There's bonus content that we've started doing recently that I think is really good and people should tune in. Me and Tim had to sit down and chat for ages about the politics of the body and working with the body. Tim obviously is a tattoo artist. I've done sex work. We talked a bit about this. We talked about how alt culture evolves, and we also just hang out and chill. And sometimes we do streams in the Red Planet Patreon Discord where Mule and I show Tim episodes of Deep Space Nine because he hasn't seen any Star Trek, so we have to explain oh yeah, there's a race of aliens who are goblins, and it's they're how do I say this? They are the Jews, but it's not they're exploring anti-Semitism. It seems like it's a super anti-Semitic thing to do, but actually it's really interesting. And then we watch it, and then Tim's like, "Oh yeah, that's actually really interesting." It turns out, yeah. But yeah, patreon.com/red_planet. There will be more bonus content in future. There is more all the time, and of course supporting the show helps us to do bigger projects like our documentary about the ZAD, which we are hoping to finish this year. We have a trip back out there planned in March, so go over there, check out the tiers you can support us at the top tier. You can get a personal thank you at the end of every single show. So thank you to our sicko level subscriber, Risk Inverse. Right, last thing to do before we end the stream. Mule, where can people find you?
People can find me on the linktree.ee/DJMUEL. Go on there and check out all my links. I've just put out a new YouTube video on Elon Musk doing the Nazi salute. It would really, really help me out if you went and watched that, comment, and subscribe. I'm basically just saying in that video everything that we say on this show, which is don't get too mired in the details. There's no point in debating it. Just fucking organize. But yeah, if you could and comment and subscribe, that'll help me in the algorithm. That really, really helps me out. And don't point out the fact that I called it a Roman salute and tell me that people in Roman Empire didn't do that, because I know that and it's annoying, and it's not even, I only say it once in the video, just please stop saying that I said that. I know that I said that. I know they didn't do that. It's really fucking annoying. It's even worse than when people call me the F word. Don't do it. I'm really upset about it. So yeah, that's that. So go and help me out with that. But Tim, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube and Twitch as Conquest of Dread, or you can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky as Dread Conquest. Or if you are into tabletop RPG stuff, check out on Twitter Dark RPG 2000. It's a little project I've been working on for a while. It's almost done. It's very cool. Yes, you'll like it. If you like this show, you'll probably like it. But Soph, what about you?
Everything, all the places to find me online are collected together at linktree.ee/Sophie from Mars. My main thing is YouTube. If you didn't know, I make video essays and sometimes less scripted, kind of bit more rambly videos, like I did one about Trump and how to prepare for him. Like Mule, I'm just finding different ways to say we got to get offline and organize. That's the thing you got to do. My video essays are exploring other topics more deeply, like a one called The Mad and the Mentally Ill, which I've been working on for a while now, which will be out in the next few months, and another one about the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson. All that will be available early at my Patreon, patreon.com/Sophie from Mars. So yeah, that's me. We will see you all next week. Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye.